These are 100 hidden facts, details, and quiet truths buried across the Resident Evil series. Things most players never notice. Some of these are small, some completely change how you see the story, and a few reveal just how broken the world already was, long before the outbreaks began. In the 1996 debut of the series, a very specific and calculated editorial choice was made to almost entirely scrub the word zombie from the script. While the public and the media immediately labeled the reanimated corpses as zombies, the developers and writers at Capcom wanted to ground the horror in a terrifying medical reality rather than supernatural folklore. In the original Japanese and English scripts, the creatures are referred to as cannibals, victims, or simply the infected. So this was intended to force the player to view the threat as a pharmaceutical disaster, a mutation of the human condition caused by a tangible, microscopic agent rather than a curse or a magical ritual. By avoiding the common tropes associated with the living dead, the series established that these creatures still possessed a vestigial, biological link to humanity, making the act of neutralizing them feel more like a clinical execution than a monster hunt. This linguistic suppression served a dual purpose in the early lore of the Arklay Mountains. It mirrored the institutional denial of the RPD and the Umbrella Corporation, who utilized clinical terminology to mask the visceral horror of their containment failures. To call them zombies would be to admit a loss of control over the fundamental laws of nature. To call them cannibals was to frame the incident as a manageable criminal or medical crisis. This grounding in biological realism allowed the series to transition seamlessly into the era of biopower, where the monsters were not anomalies, but products with spec sheets and viral loads. Even decades later, as the world moved into the mold and Las Plagas eras, the refusal to use the word zombie remains a hallmark of the series' commitment to the idea that horror is something that can be manufactured in a laboratory. Secret 2: Mansion Foreshadowing. The Spencer Mansion Gallery is not merely a collection of Victorian art. It is a visual archive of the biological rot that founded the Umbrella Empire. The paintings, specifically the portrait of a woman and the old man, are subtle foreshadowing devices that mirror the future mutations of the Trevor and Spencer lineages. The portrait of a woman is a chilling reference to Lisa Trevor, whose face was eventually replaced by a mask of stitched flesh, while the old man reflects the frail, dying state of Oswald Spencer as he attempted to transcend his own mortality through the progenitor virus. These images suggest that the architecture of the mansion was designed to be a ritualistic mirror of the biological experiments happening beneath the floors, connecting the 1967 construction directly to the ritualistic roots of Mother Miranda's village. This connection to the village in Eastern Europe is vital for understanding the complete timeline. The puzzles and statues of the mansion were not the whims of a mad architect named George Trevor, but a corporate attempt by Spencer to replicate the Four Kings altar and the trials of the Megamycete. The paintings serve as a reminder that the Umbrella Corporation was essentially a high-tech offshoot of an ancient fungal cult. By placing these images in the gallery, Spencer was immortalizing his own ideology of eugenics and forced evolution, turning a hallway into a prophetic timeline of his family's descent into monstrosity. Every piece of art in the Arklay labs was a statement of corporate intent, proving that the monsters were planned long before the first vial of the T-virus was ever uncorked. Secret 3: The Keeper's Timeline. The Keeper's Diary, famously known for its final entry of itchy, tasty, G is one of the most significant pieces of environmental storytelling in the series, because its dates align exactly with the official Umbrella research logs. If you cross-reference the Keeper's description of skin irritation and a growing hunger with the Arklay lab reports from May 1998, you can track the symptomatic progression of the T-virus aerosol leak in real time. The Keeper was not just a victim of an accident. He was an unintentional test subject whose slow transformation provided the scientists with a perfect case study on how the virus destroys the frontal lobe while hyperstimulating the hypothalamus. The diary is a visceral record of a man rotting away, while his corporate masters watch through the surveillance cameras. This alignment of dates proves that Umbrella's leadership chose to let the staff turn rather than initiating a rescue. They wanted to see the reanimation process in a domestic setting, treating the residential quarters of the mansion as a secondary testing floor. The Keeper's gradual loss of literacy and his eventual cannibalism of his colleague, Scott, were documented as successful milestones in the development of the T-virus. The diary represents the human cost of the pharmaceutical myth, showing that the corporation viewed its own employees as disposable biological material. By the time the STARS team arrived in July, the Keeper had already been a data point in a corporate ledger for nearly 2 months, a ghost of a containment failure that was never supposed to be found. Which is secret for statue puzzles and insignia. The RPD precinct was famously repurposed from a former art museum, but the hidden truth is that its most iconic features, the goddess statue and the unicorn puzzles, are actually repurposed Umbrella security keys. The department was not just funded by the corporation. It was literally built to be an Umbrella annex. The architectural puzzles were integrated into the building's foundation to ensure that the RPD could serve as a secure logistics hub for the movement of bioweapons between the city and the Arklay labs. This means that every time an officer like Leon Kennedy solved a puzzle, they were utilizing the same biometric and mechanical security protocols used in the Nest laboratory. The RPD was a vertical hunting ground designed to protect the corporation's secrets under the guise of municipal law enforcement. This integration of police and corporate infrastructure is the ultimate proof of Chief Brian Iron's corruption. He allowed the precinct to be transformed into a giant, ornate puzzle box that could be locked down at a moment's notice to prevent any unauthorized investigation. The RPD was the front line of the institutional denial that plagued Raccoon City, a building that was physically incapable of serving the public because it was biologically programmed to serve the company. The statues were symbols of the merging of state and corporate power, proving that in Raccoon City, the law was merely an extension of the laboratory. The precinct was a monument to the fact that Umbrella didn't just buy the police. They designed the very walls they worked in. Secret 5, Lisa's Lullaby. In the 1996 reimagining of the mansion incident, a haunting detail was added that reveals the deep psychological trauma of the Trevor family. If you stand near the shack in the woods without attacking, you can hear Lisa Trevor humming a distorted, broken version of Mother's Lullaby. This is the same melody found on the music sheet used to solve one of the mansion's puzzles, proving that despite 30 years of being a biological sponge for every virus in the Umbrella arsenal, Lisa retained a sliver of her human memory. The lullaby is a tragic link to her mother, Jessica, who was executed shortly after the family was abducted in 1967. Lisa's humming is a biological echo of a life that was stolen to fuel the development of the G virus. The presence of the lullaby suggests that the mold and the viruses have a common property of archiving memory. a concept that would later be fully explored with the megamycete in Eastern Europe. Even as her body became a mass of mutated tissue, and her face was hidden behind a mask of skin, Lisa was still tethered to the moment her family was dismantled. The STARS officers were not just fighting a monster. They were fighting the physical manifestation of 30 years of corporate war crimes. The humming in the dark is the ultimate indictment of Oswell Spencer's ambition, a reminder that the foundations of the Umbrella Empire were built on the agonizing screams and distorted memories of a little girl who just wanted her mother to come home. Secret 6. The stress of footsteps. When the Tyrant model, T-003, was introduced in the 1998 Raccoon City collapse, his presence was defined by the rhythmic, heavy thud of his footsteps. In the modern reimagining of the incident, these sounds were specifically mixed with low-frequency tones designed to trigger a primal, mammalian stress response in the human ear. This was a psychological bioweapon utilized by the developers to manipulate the player's heart rate and adrenaline levels, mirroring the tactical terror that a tyrant would induce in a real-world combat scenario. The sound design was not just for atmosphere. It was an exercise in biotactical stress management, ensuring that the player felt the same biological dread as the STARS survivors. This focus on the stress of the hunt reflects the clinical goals of the original Umbrella research. The Tyrant models were designed to be tireless, psychological predators that would break the morale of an enemy force before they ever made physical contact. By incorporating these low-frequency thuds, the game replicates the experience of being hunted by an apex predator that is biologically incapable of fatigue or mercy. The footsteps are a constant reminder of the standardization of the monster, where a creature is engineered to be as efficient at causing fear as it is at causing death. In the complete timeline, the Tyrant's walk is the sound of the corporate machine closing in on its targets, a rhythmic countdown to the final evaluation. Secret 7, Animation, Rig, Recycling. A fascinating technical secret that bridges the gap between early development and the finished product is the recycling of the head tilt zombie animation. In this specific movement, where a zombie stares at the player with a tilted neck before lunging, was originally developed for a failed 1994 Capcom prototype of a first-person horror game. When that project was cancelled, the skeletal rig and the animation data were shelved, only to be resurrected for the original Resident Evil. This rig recycling is a meta-narrative of the series itself, taking a failed, dead project and reanimating it into a new, more aggressive form. The head tilt became the definitive visual cue for the T-virus infection, representing the total loss of motor control and the hyperstimulation of the hunger centers in the brain. This reuse of animation rigs shows how the developers were constantly refining the visual language of the dead. By utilizing a rig that was designed for a first-person perspective, they ensured that the zombies in the fixed camera era still possessed a sense of personal, intimate threat. The tilt of the head suggests a vestigial curiosity or a predatory focus, making the creature feel like more than just a shambling corpse. In the lore, this physical deformity is often linked to the way the T-virus attacks the cervical spine and the brain stem, causing the muscles to contract unevenly. The recycled animation became a cornerstone of the series' identity, proving that even the technical foundations of the game were built on the idea of reanimation. Secret 8. The Mizoil Clark. One of the most chilling details of the early Raccoon City outbreak can be found in the gas station Clark encountered by Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield. While it appears he was bitten only minutes before their arrival. A medical analysis of his skin pallor and the blood spray in the room suggests he had been symptomatic for at least 4 hours. This means that the quiet, isolated gas station on the outskirts of the city had been an active death trap all afternoon, with the clerk slowly turning into a predator while unsuspecting travelers stopped for fuel. This detail destroys the myth of a sudden outbreak and proves that the city was undergoing a silent, systemic collapse throughout the day of September 29th. The state of the Mizoil clerk is a microcosm of the Raccoon City disaster. He was a victim of the institutional denial that prevented any public warning from being issued, even as the hospitals and sewers were already overflowing with the dead. By the time Leon arrived, the flu had already reached the city limits, and the silent containment failures had already claimed the most vulnerable workers. The clerk's slow transformation is a testament to the lethality of the waterborne T virus infection, which was already in the coffee and the soda machines of every convenience store in the county. The gas station was not the start of the nightmare. It was just the point where the nightmare finally stepped into the light. Secret 9. Pre-outbreak logos. In the ruins of Raccoon City, the presence of the Umbrella Corporation is inescapable. But the true depth of their influence is hidden in the pre-outbreak infrastructure. Umbrella logos can be found on public trash cans, park benches, and even the city's sanitation equipment. This establishes that Umbrella didn't just fund the city, they literally owned the ground the citizens walked on. Raccoon City was a corporate colony, where every public utility was a branded product, and every municipal service was a front for a pharmaceutical experiment. This systemic ownership ensured that when the leak occurred, there was no independent infrastructure left to handle the crisis. The city's foundations were a corporate asset, and they were liquidated along with the population. This visual branding was part of a massive PR campaign designed to attract high-level scientists and their families to the region. By creating a utopian Midwest town with the best parks and the cleanest streets, Umbrella ensured a steady supply of intellectual labor and a compliant, grateful population. The logos on the trash cans were a subtle reminder of who was responsible for the city's prosperity, creating a psychological dependence that made the citizens slow to question the rising number of accidents in the mountains. In the complete timeline, Raccoon City was the first smart city of the biological age, a place where the corporation provided the life and the virus provided the death. Secret 10. Canon typewriters. A detail that bridges the gap between gameplay mechanics and hard lore is the fact that the save room typewriters are canonically Umbrella-issued royal models. This explains why the same saving mechanism and the same brand of ink ribbon can be found in everything from the RPD precinct to the top-secret Nest laboratory and the Antarctic base. Umbrella standardized their administrative hardware across their global network to ensure that their research logs and memos were consistent and easily archived. The typewriters are the standardized administrative tools of the bioweapons empire, a physical link between the secretary at the police station and the scientist in the viral incubation chamber. This standardization also served a darker purpose. By providing the hardware for the city's records, Umbrella ensured they had a degree of control over how information was documented and stored. The typewriters are a symbol of the bureaucracy of silence that defined the series. Every report written by the STARS team or the RPD officers was typed on a machine manufactured by the very company they were investigating. It highlights the total saturation of the city by corporate interests Even the act of saving your progress is done through the permission of Umbrella's industrial supply chain. The typewriters are the silent witnesses to the entire history of the outbreak, recording the final words of thousands of victims on corporate-approved paper. Secret 11. The sound of the dead. The moans of the zombies in the original games are some of the most iconic sounds in horror history, but their creation involved a disturbing process of audio manipulation. The sound team layered actual human breathing, slowed by 40%, over the sounds of a dry, scraping throat and guttural vocalizations. This created an uncanny valley effect, where the ear recognizes the sound as human, but the rhythm and the frequency are fundamentally wrong. It suggests a respiratory system that is failing, or a throat that has been desiccated by the T-virus's high metabolic demands. The sound design was intended to communicate that the zombies were not just monsters, but medical anomalies in a state of constant physical distress. This audio layering reflects the biological reality of the T-virus infection. Because the virus hyperstimulates the hypothalamus, the host is in a state of permanent, agonizing hunger that overrides the ability to form speech. The scraping sound is the result of the vocal cords being damaged by the constant groaning and the lack of hydration, while the slowed breathing represents the sluggish, reanimated state of the circulatory system. The moans are a biological distress signal that triggers a natural fear response in the player. In the lore, these sounds were often heard echoing through the mansion's ventilation shafts, providing a psychological gauntlet for the survivors long before they ever saw a reanimated corpse. Secret 12. The ventilation rule. In the original 1996 incident, a subtle rule of environmental storytelling guided the player toward the truth. Blood trails and signs of struggle almost always lead toward ventilation shafts. This was a deliberate hint that the infection in the Arclay lab was airborne before it was fluid-borne. While the public was told the cannibalism was a result of physical attacks, the researchers in the mansion were actually the victims of a containment failure in the HVAC system. The T-virus had been aerosolized, meaning the staff were breathing in their death sentence long before the first zombie ever bit them. The blood near the vents represents the desperate, final attempts of the researchers to block the air supply, as they realized their lungs were being colonized by the pathogen. This distinction between aerosol and fluid transmission is vital for understanding the lethality of the Arclay leak. It meant that the mansion was a hot zone from the moment the first vial broke, and no amount of tactical skill could protect the staff once the virus entered the air. This was the silent containment failure that Umbrella chose to observe rather than fix. They wanted to see the effectiveness of airborne transmission in a closed, Victorian environment, using the ventilation shafts as the primary delivery system. For the STARS survivors, the ventilation rule was a terrifying realization that they were walking through a house where the very air was a weapon. It remains one of the most sophisticated examples of invisible horror in the series. Secret 13. The slowing bells. During the final hours of Raccoon City in 1998, the bells of St. Michael's Clock Tower provide a haunting acoustic timeline of the city's collapse. As the player progresses through the commercial district, the bells ring at a progressively slower beats per minute. This was intended to symbolize the failing heart rate of the city as the infection reached its peak and the sterilization order drew closer. The clock tower, a symbol of European architecture and civic order, was literally running out of time. By the time Jill Valentine reached the courtyard for her confrontation with the nemesis, the bells were a sluggish funeral dirge for a population that had already been erased. The slowing bells also reflect the psychological state of the survivors, as the adrenaline of the first day faded into the exhaustion of the final night. The perception of time began to distort. The clock tower was built by Henry Castaneda, a man who famously hid anti-corporate messages in the architecture, and the slowing of his clock was his final mechanical protest against the Umbrella Corporation. The tower was designed to be the heart of the community, and its mechanical failure mirrored the biological failure of the people who lived in its shadow. The bells are the last rhythmic sound of a city that was about to be silenced forever by a thermobaric flash. Secret 14, Dead Man's Lock. A persistent mystery in the RPD precinct is why certain doors only become locked after the player triggers specific events or moves to a new area. Canonically, this is known as the Dead Man's Lock, as the police station was being overrun on the night of September 29th. The surviving RPD officers were retreating through the building, locking heavy security doors behind them to slow the advance of the infected. In many cases, these officers were bitten or trapped on the other side, dying in the very rooms they had just sealed. When the player finds a door that was previously open but is now locked, they are encountering the final, desperate act of a colleague who died to buy them a few more minutes of safety. This mechanic emphasizes the chaotic, non-linear nature of the Raccoon City collapse. The RPD was not a static environment. It was a shifting battleground where the defensive response was failing in real time. The locks are a testament to the police failure that Chief Irons had orchestrated. The officers were forced to use the mansion-style security keys to protect themselves, unaware that the building was designed to trap them as much as the monsters. Every locked door is a tombstone for an officer who was trying to serve and protect, in a building that had been sold out by its own chief. It turns a simple gameplay mechanic into a visceral reminder of the human cost of the institutional denial. Secret 15, Save Room Psychology. The evolution of the save room lighting across the complete timeline reveals a deliberate shift in the series' psychological intent. In the early Arklay and Raccoon City eras, the save rooms were often bathed in a warm, amber glow, accompanied by melodic, soothing music. This was intended to create a sanctuary for the player, a womb-like environment that contrasted with the dark, cold hallways of the mansion. However, as the series moved into the Mold and Village eras, the lighting shifted toward a cold, clinical blue and a starker, more industrial atmosphere. This reflects the normalization of horror, where safety is no longer a warm reprieve, but a temporary clinical pause, in a world that has been permanently altered by biological warfare. This shift in lighting parallels the transition of the STARS survivors into global operatives. For a rookie like Leon Kennedy, a save room was a rare moment of peace in a world that had just ended. For a veteran like Chris Redfield in 2021, safety is a high-tech tactical briefing in a cold, blue-lit BSAA transport. The amber light of the 90s represented the last remnants of a world that still believed the nightmare could be ended. The clinical blue of the modern era represents a world that knows the monsters are now the establishment. The save room is no longer a place to recover your humanity. It is a place to recalibrate your weapons for the next phase of the war. The reanimated corpses of Raccoon City are often viewed as mindless husks, driven solely by the hunger centers of the brain. But a terrifying truth hidden in the biological files is the concept of residual memory. Within the T-virus infection cycle, the destruction of the frontal lobe is not always instantaneous. This leads to a phenomenon where zombies will often cluster around vending machines, staff break rooms, or the front desks of the RPD precinct. They are not there for the food or the duty. They are stuck in a biological loop of their final human routines. Their decaying nervous systems are attempting to fulfill the muscle memory of a life that ended in a fever. This makes the zombies of the Arklay era more than just monsters. They are echoes of a civilization that was consumed by its own daily habits. This residual memory is what makes the urban outbreak so much more unpredictable than a laboratory leak. A zombie that was once a locksmith might still linger near a door, scratching at the wood with broken fingernails, or a former soldier might still attempt to maintain a defensive posture, even after their higher brain functions have dissolved. Umbrella's researchers documented this behavior as a successful retention of motor skills, viewing it as a proof of concept for a biological worker that could perform repetitive tasks without the need for pay or rest. To the survivors, however, seeing a reanimated neighbor standing at their own front door is the ultimate psychological horror. It is a reminder that the T-virus does not just kill the person, it traps their body in a mockery of their existence. Secret 17. Licker soundwaves. The licker mutation is a visceral evolution of the T-virus, but their hunting method is far more sophisticated than simple hearing. Because the mutation skins the host alive and covers the eyes with a mass of exposed brain tissue, the licker has developed a hypersensitivity to haptic vibrations and sound waves. They do not just hear your footsteps, they feel the rhythmic thud of your heart rate through the floorboards. In the lore of the RPD collapse, officers discovered that even standing perfectly still on a metal floor was not enough to escape a licker's attention. The creature can detect the microscopic vibrations caused by a human's breathing and the shifting of their weight, turning the environment itself into a sensory web for the predator. This sensitivity is why lickers are often found on ceilings or in narrow corridors, where vibrations are easily channeled. They utilize the architecture of the city as a biological sonar system. Umbrella Europe's research into the V-Act mutation confirmed that the licker's hearing is so precise that they can distinguish between the footsteps of a human and those of another infected creature. They are the evolution of the hunter, designed to operate in dark, confined spaces, where visual sight is a liability. For a survivor, the only way to truly bypass a licker is to move with a level of stillness that is biologically impossible for a panicked human being. They are the apex predators of the city's shadows, turning every surface into a weapon of detection. Secret 18. Tyrant pathing. The pursuit of the player by the Tyrant model. T-003 is a masterclass in biotactical AI, but the lore reason for his persistence is even more chilling. Unlike the zombies, the Tyrant is equipped with a live internal navigation mesh that is constantly calculating the shortest route to the player's last known noise location. He does not cheat by teleporting. He is a tireless, industrial engine of pursuit that is programmed to treat the RPD precinct like a tactical combat zone. His pathing logic is designed to simulate a search and destroy mission, utilizing the very same hallways and stairs as the survivors. This creates a sense of unstoppable momentum, proving that Umbrella had successfully turned the biological monster into a clinical, mechanical soldier. The Tyrant's pathing is also influenced by the power limiter coat he wears. This synthetic, bulletproof leather is not just for protection. It is designed to keep the Tyrant's heart rate and mutation levels stable during the hunt. If the Tyrant were allowed to run at full speed or mutate too early, he would become an uncontrollable beast. The slow, rhythmic walk is a choice made by his programming to ensure a high-efficiency harvest of the targets. He is a tool of containment and erasure, moving through the station with the cold logic of a debt collector. The Tyrant pathing proves that Umbrella had mastered the art of controlled aggression, creating a weapon that would never lose its way in the dark. Secret 19. The Hunter's Blink. One of the most unsettling physical traits of the Hunter Alpha and Beta models is a detail that many players miss during a frantic encounter. The creatures never blink. Within the biological engineering of the Arclay labs, the Hunter's eyelids were either surgically removed or mutated away entirely to ensure that the predator never loses sight of its target for even a millisecond. This was a specific bio-tactical requirement, requested by Umbrella's military clients who wanted a soldier that possessed an absolute, unbroken visual lock on the enemy. The constant, unblinking stare of the hunter creates an inhuman focus that makes them far more terrifying than the mindless zombies. They are a weapon that is permanently awake and permanently ready to strike. This lack of blinking also serves a biological purpose, as the hunter's eyes are protected by a thick, transparent membrane that keeps the optic nerves hydrated without the need for traditional eyelids. This allows them to operate in high-speed combat and harsh environments without any loss of visual clarity. In the complete timeline, the hunter's blink is a symbol of the transition from accidental infection to engineered perfection. A creature that does not blink is a creature that has been stripped of the last remnants of its mammalian biology to become a pure instrument of war. Every second a STARS officer spends in the sights of a hunter is a second where the predator is cataloguing their every move with clinical precision. Secret 20. G-Virus Panic. The mutation of William Birkin into the G entity is a tragedy of science, but the massive eyes that grow on his shoulder and back are more than just grotesque features. These are sensory nodes that can detect changes in air pressure and heat signatures, allowing the G host to swing at enemies it cannot even see. This is known as G-Virus Panic, a state where the host's body is in a constant, frantic state of biological adaptation. As the original human brain of William Birkin dissolved, the G cells began to grow new optic nerves to compensate for the loss of his human sight. The eyes are the body's desperate attempt to find light in a world of darkness, creating a predator that possesses a 360-degree field of tactical awareness. This sensory evolution makes the G-virus far more volatile and dangerous than the T-virus. While a Tyrant can be outmaneuvered through stealth, sheer G-host can feel the air moving around it, making it nearly impossible to ambush. The eyes are a manifestation of the virus's Golgotha logic, a reference to the biblical site of suffering, representing the endless, painful mutations of the host as it tries to achieve a perfect, immortal form. Every new eye that opens on Birkin's flesh is a node of a biological hive mind that is trapped in a state of permanent, mutagenic panic. It is a being that is biologically incapable of peace, a creature that must keep evolving and consuming to prevent its own cellular collapse. Secret 21. Water contamination. The total collapse of Raccoon City can be traced back to a single industrial failure at the P-12A incinerator facility. In the days leading up to the outbreak, the facility began leaking viral waste directly into the circular river, which served as the city's primary water source. This is why the infection hit a critical mass so rapidly in late September. The citizens were not just being bitten, they were drinking the T-virus for days. The flu that the authorities had dismissed was actually a systemic, waterborne infection that was colonizing the bodies of the population before the first riot ever broke out. Raccoon City was poisoned from the inside out, turning every kitchen and every public fountain into a delivery system for the plague. This contamination was part of Umbrella's urban field test strategy. By monitoring the spread of the virus through the city's plumbing, they could gather data on how a biological weapon affects a modern civilian infrastructure. They saw how the infection moved from the poorer districts to the affluent suburbs, documenting the social dissolution that occurs when a population realizes their own environment has turned against them. The water was the most efficient vector Umbrella ever used, proving that they didn't need to drop a bomb to destroy a city. They just needed to wait for the people to get thirsty. The water contamination is the definitive proof that the Raccoon City disaster was a managed massacre. Secret 22. The power grid. The flickering lights and failing equipment in the RPD precinct were not just for atmosphere. They were the physical symptoms of a city that had already lost its life support. By September 26th, the Raccoon City power plant had been abandoned by its staff, leaving the city's electrical grid to fail in a series of cascading blackouts. The precinct was running on failing emergency generators, which is why the elevators were unreliable and the electronic locks were often jammed. This created a logistics of despair, where the police were forced to fight in the dark with tools that were no longer functional. The failure of the power grid was the final nail in the coffin for the RPD's defensive response. This loss of power also affected the containment systems in the various laboratories hidden beneath the city. As the cooling systems and the biometric locks lost power, the most dangerous bioweapons were allowed to escape their cages. The darkness of Raccoon City was a tactical advantage for Umbrella, as it allowed their UBCS teams and Tyrants to move through the streets with minimal interference. The city was a dark, burning cage, where the infrastructure of civilization had been replaced by the architecture of a laboratory. The flickering lights in the station were a countdown to the moment when the city's heart rate would finally hit zero, leaving the survivors in a world where the only light came from the fires of the dead. Secret 23. City Planning Sabotage. One of the most dark secrets of Raccoon City is that its very layout was a form of biological sabotage. The city was intentionally bottlenecked by umbrella-funded architects to ensure that in the event of an outbreak, the military could easily seal off specific neighborhoods for containment testing. The narrow bridges, the limited exits from the commercial district, and the sprawling, maze-like suburbs were all designed to trap the population within a series of observation zones. Raccoon City was not a town built for its residents. It was a vertical hunting ground designed to make the cleanup phase as efficient as possible for the corporation's private security forces. This sabotage by design ensured that the citizens were funneled towards specific locations, such as the RPD precinct or the General Hospital, where Umbrella could monitor the spread of the virus in high-density environments. The city was a biological maze, and the people were the lab rats. The architects who built the safe suburbs were often former Umbrella consultants who specialized in urban combat and crowd control. They created a world where escape was a physical impossibility, turning the Midwest hub into a massive open-air laboratory. The city planning was the first step in the perfect crime, a way to ensure that the total loss of the city would provide the maximum amount of research data before the sterilization order was given. Secret 24. The Empty Zoo. In the chaotic days of the urban collapse, the Raccoon City Zoo became a scene of primal horror that the public never witnessed. The zoo animals were some of the first to turn, as they were exposed to the virus through the contaminated river water and the rodent population. The most infamous case was the zombie elephant, Oscar, who escaped his enclosure and became a living siege weapon in the commercial district. The secret to his escape was a final act of mercy by his keeper, who unlocked the cage as the infection took hold, unknowingly releasing a massive reanimated predator into the streets. The empty zoo was a testament to how the T-virus could weaponize the natural world against the urban one. The animals in the zoo, ranging from lions to hyenas, proved that the T-virus was not limited to human hosts. These non-human baobabus showed a level of aggression and physical resilience that exceeded even the zombies. Umbrella monitored these animal outbreaks with great interest, documenting how an infected predator could destabilize a residential area even more effectively than a human soldier. The zoo was a secondary testing floor that proved the virus was an invasive species capable of rewriting an entire ecosystem. When the city was finally destroyed, the loss of the zoo animals was a minor detail in the reports. But for the survivors who faced a zombie elephant in the dark, it was the ultimate proof that nature had been permanently corrupted by the corporation. Secret 25, the hospital's secret floor, Raccoon General Hospital, ostensibly a place of healing, held a dark secret in its hidden basement levels. Under the guise of an experimental cancer treatment program, Umbrella-funded doctors were using terminal patients as live test subjects for the T-virus. This secret floor was where the first urban zombies were created and observed in a clinical setting. The patients were not being cured. They were being prepared for the outbreak. This institutional betrayal meant that the hospital was the epicenter of the infection, long before the first riots began. The cancer treatment was a pharmaceutical myth designed to provide the company with a steady supply of human subjects who wouldn't be missed by the public. This secret floor was integrated with the city's sewer and waste systems, allowing the scientists to dispose of failed assets without raising suspicion. When the containment finally failed at the hospital, the secret floor became a charnel house where the doctors and the patients were consumed by the very pathogens they had been cultivating. The hospital was a microcosm of Umbrella's global strategy, hiding a massacre behind a logo of health and progress. For the survivors who entered the hospital looking for a cure, the secret floor was a horrifying realization that the people they trusted to save them were actually the ones who had signed their death warrants. The hospital was a temple to the clinical insanity that defined the Umbrella Way. Secret 26. Orphanage supply chains. One of the most harrowing secrets of the RPD precinct is its direct connection to the Raccoon City Orphanage via a series of secret industrial tunnels. These tunnels allowed Chief Irons to move children from the orphanage to the Nest laboratory without any public record or municipal oversight. The children were treated as biological commodities used for the development of the G virus and other specialized mutations that required younger, more malleable hosts. The orphanage was not a charity. It was a supply chain for the corporation's most sensitive research. Chief Irons acted as the gatekeeper for this trade, using his authority to ensure that the missing children were never officially investigated. This connection between the police, the orphanage, and the lab is the ultimate proof of the systemic rot in Raccoon City. The heroes of the RPD were working in a building that was literally connected to a child trafficking network for a pharmaceutical giant. The tunnels were equipped with high-tech security and biometric locks, ensuring that the movement of the assets was as efficient as the movement of the viral samples. For Claire Redfield, the discovery of the orphanage's true purpose was a moment of absolute horror that shifted her mission from survival to a quest for vengeance. The orphanage was a symbol of the total erasure of the individual that Umbrella required to build their new world order. Secret 27. The clean streets before the chaos. Raccoon City was consistently voted the safest city in America, a title that was used in a massive PR campaign to attract high-level scientists and their families to move to the region. This was a calculated utopian image funded by Umbrella to ensure they had a constant supply of elite talent for their laboratories. They wanted their researchers to feel that their families were safe and their futures were secure, creating a gilded cage that was easier to manage. The clean streets and the low crime rate were maintained by a police force that was paid to look the other way, ensuring that the only crimes happening in the city were the ones authorized by the corporation. This facade of safety was a psychological weapon. It made the citizens slow to react to the early signs of the outbreak, as they had been conditioned to believe that their city was immune to disaster. They trusted the Umbrella brand more than their own instincts, allowing the infection to reach a critical mass while they continued to enjoy their corporate-sponsored lives. The safest city in America was actually the most dangerous place on Earth, a town that had been sanitized only to be used as a petri dish. The clean streets were the first layer of the grand deception, a way to ensure that when the fire finally came, the people would be caught completely off guard, trapped in a paradise that was actually a charnel house. Secret 28. Abandoned luggage. If you walk through the Raccoon City train station during the final nights, the piles of abandoned suitcases tell a silent story of a betrayal that the public never fully understood. From the evacuation of the city was a lie. Files found in the station master's office suggest that the trains stopped running hours before the public was ever told to evacuate. The luggage represents the thousands of citizens who gathered at the station with their belongings, only to be told that the system was down or that the lines were blocked. They were left to wait in the terminal until the infection finally reached them, their suitcases becoming the only tombstones for the families who were erased in the dark. This sabotage of escape was a deliberate tactic by Umbrella and the federal government to ensure that the biological data of the city remained within the blast zone. They didn't want a mass exodus of potentially infected survivors reaching other states. The train station was a bottleneck designed to herd the people into a single, manageable location for the sterilization order. The abandoned luggage is a visceral reminder of the institutional discarding of human life that defined the Raccoon City disaster. The people were told that help was coming, but the trains had already been diverted to transport viral samples and BOWs out of the city, leaving the citizens to die on the platform. Secret 29. The Apple Inn Fire. The massive fire at the Apple Inn, visible from several districts during the outbreak, was not started by an industrial accident or a viral leak. It was started by a group of desperate survivors who were trying to smoke out a cluster of infected in the hotel's lobby. Their attempt at tactical defense accidentally turned into a crematorium, as the fire spread through the aging structure and trapped dozens of healthy civilians on the upper floors. The Apple Inn fire is a tragedy of civilian panic, proving that in the absence of law and order, the people can be just as dangerous to each other as the monsters. The fire burned for days because the fire department was unable to reach the area due to the congestion of the streets and the aggression of the infected. It became a symbol of the total breakdown of civil society. For the STARS survivors, the sight of the burning hotel was a reminder that the city was no longer a place of rescue. It was a place of sacrifice. The Apple Inn was a microcosm of the sterilization order that was about to come from the federal government. The idea that the only way to kill the virus was to burn everything and everyone in its path. The fire was the final screaming end for the people who thought they had found a safe haven in the heart of the city. Secret 30, Clock Tower Symbolism. St. Michael's Clock Tower was built by Henry Castaneda, a man whose family had been destroyed by Umbrella's early land acquisitions in the Arklay Mountains. He was an architect who hated the corporation, and he hid anti-corporate messages and symbols throughout the tower's design. If you examine the statues and the carvings in the tower, you can find allegories of a giant parasite consuming a city and a goddess of justice being blinded by gold. Castaneda knew that Umbrella would eventually consume Raccoon City, and the clock tower was his mechanical time bomb designed to record the city's final hours. The symbolism of the tower makes it one of the most significant locations in the complete timeline. It represents the hidden resistance that existed in the city long before the STARS team arrived. Castaneda's architecture was a warning that the citizens chose to ignore until the bells began to slow down. For Jill Valentine, the clock tower was a place of both refuge and reckoning, the site where she faced the nemesis and realized that the city's heart had finally stopped beating. The tower was the final witness to the Umbrella era in Raccoon City, a monument to a man who had seen the rot in the foundations 30 years before the first zombie ever pulled a trigger. If you examine the discarded shelves within the commercial district pharmacies during the height of the Raccoon City collapse, a chilling medical detail becomes apparent. The only medications left in abundance are high-end painkillers and antibiotics, while the shelves for gastrointestinal medicine have been picked completely clean. This is a subtle environmental clue pointing to the waterborne nature of the early infection. Before the total collapse, the citizens were suffering from severe stomach issues and nausea caused by the T virus seeping into the municipal water supply. The pharmacy stockpiles proved that the population was attempting to treat the symptoms of a biological apocalypse with over-the-counter medicine, unaware that their own thirst was the delivery system for their demise. This detail highlights the pharmaceutical myth that Umbrella used to maintain control. By labeling the early symptoms as a severe viral flu, they ensured that the citizens would seek out standard medication rather than demanding a quarantine. The pharmacies became the first sites of civil unrest, as desperate families fought over the last bottles of antacids and rehydration salts. Umbrella's own branded products were the only things available, meaning the corporation was profiting from the very symptoms they had caused. The empty shelves are a silent testament to the thousands of people who died in their own bathrooms, believing they were just sick when they were actually being colonized by a mutagenic pathogen. Secret 32. The Red Cross Failure. In the ruins of the residential districts, evidence can be found in the form of abandoned aid tents and discarded medical crates that suggest a massive Red Cross failure. However, the files found in the RPD precinct reveal a much darker truth. The Red Cross and other international relief agencies were physically blocked from entering the city by the United States National Guard. This was a deliberate, federal quarantine designed to ensure that everyone inside the city limits remained there until the sterilization order could be executed. The government did not want humanitarian aid. They wanted a total biological seal. They allowed the city to burn and its people to be consumed to protect the national image and to hide their own complicity in Umbrella's research. This blockade turned Raccoon City into a literal death trap. The sight of aid trucks parked just miles outside the city limits, unable to move past the military checkpoints, was the final betrayal for the citizens who had reached the outskirts. It proved that the state viewed the population of a Midwest hub as collateral damage. The Red Cross failure was a managed abandonment, a way to ensure that the total loss of the city would be absolute. By the time the missile was launched, the government had already ensured that no one who had seen a zombie or a tyrant would ever make it to a witness stand. The aid crates in the streets are monuments to a mercy that was denied by the very people who signed the Constitution. Secret 33. STARS office vandalism. When you enter the STARS office in the RPD precinct after the mansion incident, the room is in a state of total disarray. While it might appear to be the result of a zombie attack, a closer inspection reveals that the office was systematically trashed and vandalized. This was not the work of the infected, but of fellow RPD officers who had been fed a diet of corporate propaganda by Chief Brian Irons. Following the return of Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, the department was told that the STARS members were crazy traitors who had caused the explosions in the mountains. The vandalism was a physical manifestation of the institutional betrayal, as the city's own protectors turned against the only people who knew the truth. This atmosphere of hostility was a calculated move by Umbrella to isolate the survivors. By turning their own colleagues against them, the corporation ensured that the STARS members would have no tactical or emotional support within the precinct. The trashed desks and the defaced photos of the team represent the death of trust in Raccoon City. It shows how easily a community can be manipulated into hating the people who are trying to save them. For Chris and Jill, seeing their own office destroyed by their friends was the moment they realized that the RPD was no longer their home. It was just another branch of the Umbrella Corporation. The vandalism was the preamble to their rogue status, forcing them to fight their war from the shadows. Secret 34. The sewer gators. The existence of the giant alligator in the Raccoon City sewers is often dismissed as an urban legend made real by the virus, but the biological files reveal a more industrial origin. The creature did not grow to that massive size. Simply by being infected with the T-virus, it grew because it was feeding on discarded Tyrant prototypes and biological waste that Umbrella had been dumping into the city's waste system for years. The sewers were the unofficial disposal site for the failed assets of the Arclay and Nest laboratories. The alligator became an accidental apex predator by consuming the high-calorie, mutagenic flesh of Umbrella's own creations. It was a monster created by corporate negligence and the VACT process of reanimation. This environmental mutation shows that the T-virus was capable of creating a secondary ecosystem beneath the city. The alligator was the king of a charnel house, a creature that had been sustained by a diet of genetically engineered meat. It serves as a visceral reminder that Umbrella's waste management was just as dangerous as their research. The sewers were not just a utility, they were a biological dumping ground where the rules of nature were being rewritten by corporate runoff. The sewer gators were the unintended consequences of a company that thought they could bury their mistakes in the dark. In the complete timeline, the alligator is a symbol of the environmental rot that would eventually lead to the collapse of the entire region. Secret 35, Nest's artificial sky. Deep within the subterranean Nest laboratory, the researchers worked under massive digital screens displaying a perfect simulated blue sky. This was not for aesthetic purposes, but a psychological necessity to prevent the scientists from going insane during months-long crunch shifts underground. Umbrella understood that the human resource was fragile, and the artificial sky was a way to maintain a facade of normalcy, while the staff conducted some of the most horrific experiments in human history. It was a biological optimization of the workplace, ensuring that the scientists remained productive and detached from the reality that they were hundreds of feet beneath a city they were actively poisoning. The artificial sky is the ultimate symbol of the corporate detachment that defined Umbrella. While the people on the surface were suffering from the flu and the water contamination, the people in the lab were enjoying a simulated afternoon in the sun. It highlights the dual reality of Raccoon City, the vibrant public face of a Midwest town, and the cold, industrial heart of a bioweapons factory. When the facility finally collapsed, the screens continued to display the blue sky over the bodies of the researchers, a chilling irony that represented the total failure of the umbrella of protection. The sky was a lie, a digital mask for a facility that was built on a foundation of mass graves and viral terror. Secret 36, the Zoo Elephant Siege. The escape of the zombie elephant, Oscar, from the Raccoon City Zoo was a tactical disaster that the military was completely unprepared for. Because the T-virus had hyper-stimulated the elephant's aggression and neutralized its pain receptors, the creature became a living siege weapon. It was capable of smashing through the RPD's makeshift barricades and overturning military transport vehicles with ease. The elephant siege proved that the T-virus could weaponize the sheer physical mass of the natural world. The creature did not just kill, it destroyed the very concept of urban cover, making the streets of the commercial district even more lethal for the survivors who were already being hunted by the Nemesis and the Tyrants. The psychological impact of seeing a reanimated elephant roaming a Midwest street was a major factor in the civilian panic of the first day. It broke the public's remaining faith in the authorities' ability to contain the situation. If a police force cannot stop an elephant, how can they stop a virus? Umbrella's observers documented the siege with great interest, noting how the creature's size made it an ideal aerial denial asset for urban destabilization. The zoo was a laboratory that Umbrella had been funding for years, and the elephant was their unintentional masterpiece. It was a reminder that in the age of biological warfare, the most dangerous weapon is the one that civilization thought it had already tamed. Secret 37. Abandoned hospital wards. The abandoned wards of Raccoon General Hospital are filled with the personal belongings of patients who were discharged during the early days of the outbreak. However, the patient logs reveal that these people were never sent home. They were moved to the hidden basement levels for observation. The abandoned luggage and the half-eaten meals in the rooms are the silent echoes of a population that was liquidated by their own healthcare providers. The hospital was not a sanctuary. It was a filter designed to identify the most compatible hosts for the T-virus before the total collapse. The abandoned wards represent the moment when the medical profession was officially subverted by the corporate machine. This institutional betrayal was absolute. The doctors were forced to choose between their Hippocratic oath and the survival of their own families, who were often being monitored by umbrella security. The hospital became a place where death was a corporate reassignment. Every empty bed in the ward represents a person who was turned into a data point in the combat data protocol. The silence of the hospital is the most haunting part of the Raccoon City era, just a reminder that the people who were supposed to protect the city were the ones who had been paid to ensure its destruction. The abandoned wards are the physical manifestation of the institutional denial that allowed the virus to win. Secret 38, the city's bottlenecked exits. A tactical analysis of the Raccoon City map reveals that the city's exits were intentionally bottlenecked by Umbrella-funded urban planners. The 3 main bridges and the single highway out of the valley were designed to be easily plugged by a small military force or a few strategically placed accidents. This was the architecture of containment, a way to ensure that the city could be turned into a closed laboratory at a moment's notice. The citizens were not residents of a free city. They were inhabitants of a controlled environment. When the outbreak hit, these bottlenecks became scenes of absolute carnage, as thousands of people were trapped in their cars while the infected moved between the lanes. This sabotage by design was the final insurance policy for Umbrella's board of directors. They knew that if a leak ever occurred, the only way to protect the global brand was to ensure that the infection died with the city. The bottlenecks prevented the T-virus from spreading to the rest of the country before the sterilization order could be executed. It was a cold calculation made decades earlier, proving that Raccoon City was always intended to be a funeral pyre. For the survivors, the bottlenecked exits were the physical manifestation of the corporation's total grip on their lives. They were trapped in a maze that had been designed to ensure their extinction, which is Secret 39, the empty orphanage playroom. One of the most devastating examples of environmental storytelling is the empty playroom in the Raccoon City orphanage. While the room is filled with toys and colourful murals, the lack of any sign of a struggle suggests a very dark reality. The children were not taken by the zombies. They were led away by people they trusted, the staff who were on the Umbrella payroll. They were moved to the Nest facility in a calm, orderly fashion, believing they were going on a field trip or moving to a safer location. The empty playroom is a testament to the clinical, bloodless way that Umbrella handled its most sensitive human resources. This realization turns the orphanage from a site of tragedy into a site of war crimes. The toys left on the floor are the only remnants of a generation that was consumed by the G-virus research. Chief Irons and the orphanage directors had turned the concept of care into a supply chain for the laboratory. The silence of the playroom is the ultimate indictment of the city's moral rot. It shows that the corporation didn't need monsters to destroy the city's future. They just needed a few compliant adults and a secret tunnel. The playroom is a haunting reminder that in the world of Resident Evil, the greatest horrors are often the ones that happen in the light, directed by the people we are taught to trust. Secret 40, the last bus out. On the outskirts of the commercial district, a single city bus can be found crashed into a barricade, its interior filled with the luggage and the remains of a group of citizens who thought they had found a way out. This is known in the lore as the last bus out. The survivors had managed to hotwire the bus and break through the first layer of the RPD's cordons, only to be stopped by a tactical kill zone established by the UBCS. The bus was not stopped by the zombies, but by corporate mercenaries who were ordered to let no one leave the hot zone. The last bus out is a monument to the desperate, failed hope of a population that was being systematically discarded. The crash site became a focal point for the early infection. as the bodies in the bus attracted the first wave of Cerberus dogs from the nearby forest. It shows how the managed containment of the city was actually just a series of massacres. The people on that bus were mothers, fathers, and office workers who had put their faith in a collective escape, only to find that the road was blocked by the same company that provided their paychecks. The last bus out is the physical manifestation of the sterilization order in its early ground-level stage. It proves that the government and Umbrella were working together to ensure that the only way out of Raccoon City was in ash. Secret 41. The abandoned radio station. The Raccoon City local radio station, located in the commercial heart of the city, provides a chilling record of the media's failure during the outbreak. In the final recordings found in the booth, the DJ moves from encouraging calm and playing classic hits to a state of absolute screaming terror as the station is breached by the infected. For the abandoned radio station is a symbol of the media suppression that Umbrella had spent decades perfecting. The reporters were told to follow the flu script until the very second the zombies broke through the glass. The silence that follows the final broadcast is the moment when the pharmaceutical myth finally died for the people of Raccoon City. The station was also a primary target for the wide-spectrum jamming that Umbrella activated on the night of September 28th. The corporation wanted to ensure that no live reports of the biological anomalies reached the outside world. The DJ was screaming into a dead microphone, believing he was warning the world when he was actually just providing a soundtrack for the monsters in the hallway. The radio station is a testament to the information vacuum that allowed the city to be destroyed in silence. It shows that the rescuers were not just blocking the roads, they were blocking the airwaves, ensuring that the Raccoon City disaster remained a localized incident until it was too late for the world to intervene. Secret 42. The city's safe bunkers. In the affluent suburbs of Raccoon City, many of the more wealthy residents had built private safety bunkers with Umbrella-funded grants. These were marketed as the ultimate protection for the modern family. But the reality was much more sinister. The bunkers were equipped with air filtration systems that were actually aerosol delivery nodes connected to the Umbrella Lab network. In the event of an outbreak, the corporation could use these bunkers to infect the city's elite in a controlled, isolated environment, turning their safe havens into containment cells. The safe bunkers were a way to ensure that even the most powerful citizens were part of the field test. The discovery of these bunkers by the STARS survivors revealed the true depth of the corporate betrayal. The people who thought they were buying safety were actually buying a front-row seat to their own mutation. The bunkers were observation zones, where the corporation could study the effects of the virus on high-status hosts without the interference of the urban chaos. It highlights the total penetration of Umbrella into every aspect of life in Raccoon City. There was no escape, not even in a high-tech fortress beneath your own lawn. The bunkers are a reminder that in the Umbrella era, safety was just another product designed to keep the test subjects in their place. Secret 43, the hospital's terminal ward. The terminal ward of Raccoon General Hospital was a specific floor dedicated to patients with late-stage cancer and other incurable diseases. The environmental storytelling reveals that this ward was used as a primary inoculation site for the T-virus. The doctors, under corporate direction, were injecting these patients with experimental treatments that were actually refined viral strains. They wanted to see if the virus's regenerative properties could cure the terminal conditions. But the result was always a rapid, violent reanimation. The terminal ward was a place where the most vulnerable people were turned into the most aggressive bioweapons, proving that Umbrella's cruelty was as clinical as it was absolute. The records in the ward show a total disregard for the patient's humanity. They were referred to as assets and hosts, their names replaced by serial numbers. The terminal ward was the birthplace of the urban zombie, a place where the pharmaceutical myth was tested on those who had no other hope. For the nurses who worked on that floor, the horror was not in the monsters, but in the realization of what they were doing to their patients. The ward is a monument to the medical atrocity that founded the Raccoon City disaster, a reminder that the corporation viewed the human body as a piece of equipment that could be fixed or recycled at will. Secret 44. The empty subway cars. The subway system of Raccoon City, known as the Kite Bros Railway, was a primary artery for the city's population. But during the outbreak, it became a tomb. The empty subway cars found in the tunnels are filled with the discarded clothing and personal items of thousands of commuters who were trapped underground when the power failed. The environmental storytelling suggests that these people didn't just die. They were consumed by the liquors and the mutated rats that lived in the tunnels. The subway was a biological pressure cooker where the high-density population provided a perfect feeding ground for the virus's most aggressive mutations. The subway system was also used as a logistics hub for the movement of BOWs between the city's secret labs and the NET storage facility. The empty cars were often used to transport these creatures under the guise of maintenance trains, ensuring that the public never saw the monsters moving beneath their feet. The subway was a dual-use infrastructure, serving as a public utility and a corporate killing floor. For the survivors who tried to use the tunnels to escape the city, the subway was a vertical trap that led them directly into the jaws of the infection. The empty cars are the final witnesses to the subterranean massacre that occurred in the shadows of the city's foundations. Secret 45, the city's sanitary lies. The Raccoon City water purification plant was the pride of the city's infrastructure. But the environmental storytelling reveals that it was actually a viral filtration site. Its true purpose was not to provide clean water to the citizens, but to separate and reclaim the T-virus from the city's industrial runoff before it could be detected by federal regulators. The sanitary lies of the plant were the foundation of the city's survival for decades. The plant was a corporate front that allowed Umbrella to operate its laboratories with total impunity, knowing that any leaks would be filtered and recycled by their own municipal equipment. When the plant finally failed in late September, the sanitary lies were exposed. The T-virus was no longer being filtered. It was being delivered directly into every home in the city. The purification plant became the epicenter of the waterborne infection, proving that the city's safe infrastructure was actually its greatest vulnerability. The sanitary lies were the ultimate success of the institutional denial that defined Raccoon City. The corporation had successfully convinced a population that their water was the cleanest in the country, while they were actually using it to brew a plague. The plant is a monument to the corporate mastery that led to the city's total destruction. Secret 46, Leon's recruitment. The official history of Leon Kennedy suggests he was hired by the United States government for his heroic actions in Raccoon City. But the secret files in the DSO archives reveal a much darker process of interrogation and blackmail. After escaping the blast zone on October 1st, Leon was not met with open arms. He was detained in a high-security black site and subjected to weeks of questioning regarding the G virus and the data he collected. The government realized that Leon was a loose end who knew too much about federal complicity in Umbrella's military contracts. Instead of silencing him permanently, they chose to weaponize him. They held the young Sherry Birkin as a literal biological hostage, informing Leon that her safety and her medical treatment for G virus remnants were entirely dependent on his voluntary service to the state. This forced recruitment transformed Leon from an idealistic rookie cop into a contained asset of the federal government. He was no longer a defender of the law. He was a tool for the very people who had signed the sterilization order for his city. This leverage protocol ensured that Leon would never speak out about the truth of the Raccoon City collapse, as doing so would sign a death warrant for the child he had risked his life to save. His entire career as a top-tier agent for the DSO was built on a foundation of systemic coercion. Every mission he completed was a payment on a debt he didn't owe, a cycle of service that kept him in the greyest areas of international law. Leon is the ultimate managed survivor, a man whose bravery was stolen and repurposed by the state. Secret 47. Jill's medical trauma. Following her escape from Raccoon City, Jill Valentine's medical reports revealed a terrifying biological reality that would haunt her for the next decade. During her confrontation with the Nemesis, Jill was infected with a highly concentrated strain of the T virus. While she was treated with a vaccine in the St. Michael's Clock Tower, the files show that the virus was never truly eradicated from her system. Instead, it entered a state of stable dormancy, with viral remnants becoming permanently integrated into her cellular structure. This made Jill a biological anomaly, a human being who was technically a carrier of the T virus for years. This medical trauma was the invisible scar that Albert Wesker eventually utilized to manipulate her biology during the Africa incident in 2009. Wesker discovered that Jill's unique physiology allowed her body to produce high levels of antibodies that could stabilize even the most volatile viral strains. He transformed her into a living research vessel, using a chemical apparatus to keep her in a state of permanent, drug-induced obedience. The trauma of being redefined by a virus was both physical and psychological. Jill went from being a star's hero to a biological resource for the man she hated most. The files show that even after her rescue, Jill suffered from cellular memory, where her body would react to biological hazards before her mind could even process the threat. She is the definitive example of how the Umbrella era does not just kill its victims, it rewrites them until they are no longer purely human. Secret 48. Chris's psych profile. In the original 1996 personnel files, Chris Redfield is described by RPD psychologists as highly skilled but prone to insubordination. This specific trait is why Albert Wesker chose him for the STARS Alpha team. Wesker didn't want a compliant soldier. He wanted a wild card with a high survival instinct to test his bioorganic weapons against. He viewed Chris as the apex human subject, the benchmark against which the Tyrant model T-002 would be measured. Wesker meticulously studied Chris's psychological resilience, noting how his loyalty to his teammates was his greatest tactical strength and his greatest biological vulnerability. To Wesker, Chris was the organic calibration tool that would prove the superiority of the T-virus. This psychological evaluation highlights the clinical insanity of the combat data protocol. Wesker was not just looking for a win. He was looking for a stress test. He deliberately placed Chris in high-pressure scenarios. The death of Forrest Speyer, the betrayal by Barry, and the awakening of the Tyrant, to see how a peak human would adapt. Chris's career as the face of the BSAA was born from this calculated trauma. He spent the next 30 years trying to prove that his humanity was stronger than the virus, unaware that his every heroic action was just more data for the global bioweapons market. Chris is a man defined by a psychological siege that began in the Arklay Mountains and has never truly ended. In Secret 49, Barry's debt. The betrayal of the STARS team by Barry Burton is often framed as a simple case of blackmail, but the hidden files suggest a more systemic, corporate manipulation. Umbrella was not just threatening Barry's family. They were paying for his daughter's astronomical medical expenses. For a rare condition that the files imply Umbrella might have caused through localized environmental testing. Barry was caught in a debt loop where the company was providing the cure for the very suffering they had created. This made Barry a financial hostage, forced to sabotage his own teammates to ensure his children could continue to receive life-saving medication. It was a masterpiece of corporate leverage that turned a good man into a tactical predator. Barry's struggle highlights the total saturation of Umbrella's influence. They didn't just own the city, they owned the health of its citizens. By the time the mansion incident occurred, Barry was so deeply indebted to the corporation that he felt he had no moral path left. He was a man who had been economically infected long before the first zombie appeared. His eventual redemption and his move to the BSAA were fueled by a desperate need to erase this debt, but the files show that he carried the guilt of his betrayal like a physical weight. Barry is a reminder that Umbrella's most effective weapons were not made of flesh and bone, but of bills, contracts, and managed dependencies. Secret 50, Ada's real name. Within the global intelligence community and the shadow files of the DSO, the name Ada Wong is confirmed to be a permanent alias. Her true name, Origin, and even her primary allegiance remains some of the series' only unbreakable secrets. Ada is a ghost of the market, a high-level mercenary who has worked for every major player in the bioweapons era while remaining loyal to none. Some theorists within the lore suggest she may be a product of a rival organization's own Wesker child-style project, engineered for infiltration and survival. Her identity is a tool that she changes as easily as her weapons, ensuring that no state or corporation can ever truly claim ownership of her. Ada represents the privatization of the plague. She is the bridge between the laboratories and the black market, the person who ensures that viral samples are always in circulation. The fact that her real name is unknown is a testament to her mastery of the information vacuum that Umbrella created. She thrives in the chaos of outbreaks, using the destruction of cities to erase her own tracks. For Leon Kennedy, Ada is the unreachable truth, a woman who represents the beauty and the lethality of the bioterror age. She is the personification of the shadow market, mysterious, profitable, and fundamentally untouchable by the law. Ada Wong is not a person. She is a professional variable in a world of controlled disasters. Secret 51, Claire's college major, Claire Redfield, was a student at Ferris State University studying social work, a detail that is often overlooked but explains her primary motivation throughout the complete timeline. Unlike her brother Chris, who is driven by military duty, or Leon, who is driven by federal law, Claire is driven by a civilian protective instinct. Her educational background in social work is the reason her stories always revolve around saving the child. From Sherry Birkin in 1998 to Moira Burton and Rani Chawla in later incidents. Claire views the biological nightmare through the lens of its humanitarian cost, making her the most empathetic and in many ways the most dangerous enemy of the Umbrella Corporation. Claire's social work major is a direct contrast to the clinical, detached science of Umbrella. While the corporation views children as assets and subjects, Claire views them as individuals with rights and futures. Her survival in Raccoon City was not based on tactical training, but on a protective fury that allowed her to overcome some of the most advanced bows in the company's arsenal. She is the voice of the discarded, the person who documents the collateral damage that the government and Umbrella try to erase. Claire's transition into a high-level operative for TerraSave was the logical evolution of her college studies, turning her empathy into a global weapon against the normalization of the monster. Secret 52. Rebecca's genius. At only 18 years old, Rebecca Chambers was a university graduate with a degree in chemistry and a specialized focus on viral pathology. She was recruited into the STARS Bravo team, specifically to be the team's disposable scientist for the Arklay investigation. Albert Wesker knew that the Bravo team would likely encounter biological anomalies they couldn't understand. Yeah, and he wanted a genius-level mind on the ground to record the initial data before the main event with the Alpha team. Rebecca was a gifted asset who was thrown into a slaughterhouse because her intellectual value outweighed her survival value in the eyes of her commander. She was the youngest victim of the combat data protocol. Rebecca's survival during the proto-outbreak and the mansion incident is a testament to the fact that her genius was as tactical as it was scientific. She was forced to learn the lethal reality of biology in a single night, moving from a classroom to a charnel house. Her ability to synthesize vaccines and chemical agents in the field was the only reason any members of the Bravo team survived as long as they did. However, the files show that after Raccoon City, Rebecca largely withdrew from active field duty, focusing instead on biodefense research. She realized that she was recruited not for her skill as a medic, but for her utility as a witness to a crime she was never supposed to solve. Rebecca is the child prodigy of the apocalypse, a reminder of how Umbrella consumed even the brightest futures. Secret 53. Wesker's eye color. A significant physical detail in the later lore is the shift in Albert Wesker's eye color to a glowing red and gold. While many assume this was a side effect of the T virus, the secret files reveal it was the result of a specific prototype strain given to him by William Birkin. This strain was designed to remain dormant until the host suffered a catastrophic physical trauma. Essentially, Wesker had to die to activate his godhood. The eye color is a biological indicator of the VACT, reanimation process, occurring in a high compatibility host. It represents the total biological rewrite of the human being, a sign that Wesker was no longer a person, but a self-sustaining biological organic weapon. The glowing eyes were also a psychological weapon that Wesker used to project his superiority over his former teammates. It was a permanent, visible reminder of his grand deception and his transcendence. The prototype strain allowed him to retain his memories and his personality, while gaining superhuman strength and speed, the holy grail of Umbrella's evolutionary research. The eyes are the signature of the mastermind, a look that would become synonymous with the global bioterrorism age. Wesker's gaze was the last thing many people saw before they were erased. A cold, golden stare that looked past the humanity of its targets and saw only assets to be liquidated. Secret 54. Chief Iron's art collection. The RPD precinct is famous for its expensive, ornate art and sculpture collection, but the secret files reveal that this was purchased with millions of dollars in bribe money from the Umbrella Corporation. This money was officially earmarked for police equipment and urban safety upgrades, which explains why the RPD ran out of high-caliber ammunition and tactical gear so rapidly during the first night of the outbreak. Chief Irons was a sadistic aesthete who traded the lives of his officers for oil paintings and marble statues. He turned his office into a private temple of corruption, where the beauty of the art contrasted with the visceral rot of the biological secrets he was protecting. The art collection also served a tactical purpose for Umbrella. By encouraging Irons to spend the budget on culture rather than defense, the corporation ensured that the city's law enforcement would be soft targets when the leak occurred. They wanted the police to be an ornamental force that looked good in the press, but was incapable of mounting a serious resistance to a biological flashpoint. The statues in the station are monuments to this betrayal, physical proof that the safety of Raccoon City was a sanitized myth. Chief Irons was the architect of the slaughter, a man who used the badge to fund a private collection of suffering and beauty, proving that in Raccoon City, the law was just another piece of art to be bought and sold. Secret 55, Marvin's Regret. Lieutenant Marvin Branner is remembered as a hero of the RPD, but the files found in the precinct reveal a man consumed by Commander's regret. Marvin stayed behind at the station, not just because of his injury, but because he felt personally responsible for the deaths of the dozens of rookie officers who followed his orders on the first night of the outbreak. He had ordered them to hold their positions in the commercial district, believing the riot control protocols would hold. When he realized they were being slaughtered by a biological enemy, it was already too late. Marvin's refusal to leave the station was an act of self-imposed penance, a decision to die with the department he had failed to protect. Marvin's files show that he was one of the few officers who actually listened to the STARS members' reports after the mansion incident, but he was silenced by Chief Irons. His regret was the realization that he had prioritized chain of command over the truth. He died in the main hall of the precinct, surrounded by the ghosts of the men and women he had led into a charnel house. Marvin is a tragic symbol of the decent man in a corrupt system, the officer who realized too late that the badge he wore was a target, not a shield. His final advice to Leon, to save everyone he can, was a desperate attempt to ensure that his own mistakes would not be repeated by the next generation of law enforcement. Secret 56, Brad Vickers' cowardice. Brad Vickers, the STARS Alpha Team pilot, is often ridiculed for his cowardice during the mansion incident, but the psychological files found in the RPD suggest a much more sympathetic cause: severe, unmanaged PTSD. Brad had witnessed the sudden and horrific crash of the Bravo team helicopter in the Arklay Mountains, seeing his friends and colleagues vanishing into a dark forest that he knew was filled with monsters. His decision to take off and leave the Alpha team was a dissociative panic response, a total biological collapse of his nervous system. Brad was a technical specialist who had never been trained for the biological horrors of the Umbrella era, and the sight of the Arklay graveyard broke him long before the first zombie ever reached the city. The files show that after the mansion incident, Brad was in a state of functional paralysis, unable to even look at a helicopter without experiencing a panic attack. He stayed in Raccoon City because he was too terrified to leave and too broken to stay, becoming a walking ghost in the weeks leading up to the final outbreak. His death at the hands of the Nemesis was a gruesome end for a man who had been psychologically sterilized by the corporation. Brad's story is a reminder that the T-virus doesn't just kill through infection. It kills through the total erasure of the spirit. He was the first casualty of fear, a man whose badge offered no protection against the memories of the Arklay Mountains. Secret 57. Billy Cohen's exoneration. Though Billy Cohen is officially listed as dead following the Bravo team helicopter crash, secret files in later BSAA and DSO databases suggest that the United States government is fully aware that he was framed for the African massacre. The mission that led to his conviction, the elimination of a non-combatant village, was an early, deniable military operation conducted by a corporate-linked special forces unit to protect a progenitor research site. Billy was the fall guy for a systemic war crime, and his death in the Arklay Mountains was a convenience for the state. The files are kept classified because his exoneration would expose the decades of military complicity in the bioweapons industry. Billy's survival is one of the series' only unchecked variables. He is a man who was deleted by the system, but continues to exist in the shadows of the bioterror age. His partnership with Rebecca Chambers proved that his tactical skill and his moral compass were still intact, making him a ghost hero of the complete timeline. The fact that the government refuses to clear his name shows that the Raccoon City era protocols of survivors and silencing are still in effect. Billy is a reminder that the monsters are not just in the labs. They are in the courtrooms and the military tribunals, ensuring that the truth remains a classified asset. Secret 58, Sheva Alomar's past. Sheva Alomar's motivation for joining the BSAA is rooted in a personal tragedy that mirrors the Raccoon City pattern of corporate neglect. Her parents were killed in a gas leak at an umbrella factory in Africa, which the files reveal was actually a containment failure involving early progenitor research. The accident was covered up by a corrupt local government and Umbrella's legal team, leaving Sheva an orphan in a world that refused to acknowledge the crime. Her career in the BSAA was a quest for accountability, a lifelong war against the people who had vaporized her family and her history. Sheva is the global voice of the victims of Umbrella's colonial bioweapon development. Her background in the Africa outpost gave her a unique understanding of the primal source of the T-virus. She realized that the pharmaceutical myth was being tested on the most marginalized populations in the world, long before it ever reached the American Midwest. Sheva's tactical partnership with Chris Redfield was the merging of two generations of trauma-based survival. She represented the global response to a threat that had spent decades hiding in the shadows of developing nations. Her files show that she viewed the BSAA not as a military force, but as a tool of reparation, a way to make the corporations pay for the soil they had poisoned and the families they had destroyed. Secret 59, Hunk's Grim Reaper title. The operative known as Hunk is the ultimate corporate ghost, the man who earned the title Grim Reaper, because he was the only survivor of every single mission he was ever sent on. This includes the disastrous G virus retrieval in the Nest Lab, where his entire unit was slaughtered by a mutated William Birkin. Hunk is the pure tactical tool of the Umbrella Corporation, a man who has stripped away all emotion and morality to become an extension of the combat data protocol. He is the cold reality of the bioweapons industry, the survivor who doesn't care about the truth, only the sample and the extraction. Hunk's files show that he was the primary trainer for Umbrella's private security force, the USS. He taught them that humanity is a tactical liability in a biological combat zone. His ability to survive against lickers, tyrants, and the G-virus entity proves that his lack of soul is his greatest defensive asset. He is the anti-hero of the complete timeline, a man who witnessed the fall of Raccoon City and simply checked his watch for the next mission. Hunk is the physical manifestation of the corporate machine, a being that is biologically human but psychologically identical to the virus he protects. He remains at large, a lethal variable in the global black market. Secret 60, Ethan Winters' DNA. The final and most visceral secret of the mold era is the revelation that Ethan Winters was technically dead since the very beginning of the Baker incident in 2017. When Ethan was attacked by Jack Baker in the initial encounter, his human body suffered a fatal biological trauma, and he was reborn as a mold construct. This explains why he could reattach severed limbs with a simple splash of first aid med. His body was no longer made of flesh and bone, but of fungal memory and regenerative spores. Ethan was a biological sleeper agent, a man who believed he was a civilian survivor, while he was actually a walking hive mind for the megamycete. Ethan's DNA was effectively replaced by the mold, turning him into a humanoid BOW without his knowledge. This is the lie of survival in its most absolute form. The BSAA and the Connections monitored Ethan because he was the first host to achieve total psychological cohesion while being fully colonized by the fungus. He was the foundational asset for the next decade of biological military research. Ethan's death in the village was a clinical termination of a successful field test, proving that even the ordinary man can be transformed into a weapon of mass destruction if the virus is allowed to rewrite his story. Ethan Winters was the first post-human hero, a man whose very humanity was a corporate invention. Secret 61, Mayor Michael Warren. The political leadership of Raccoon City was not just compromised, it was an owned subsidiary of the Umbrella Corporation. Mayor Michael Warren, the public face of the city's prosperity, was on a secret retention bonus from Umbrella that was significantly higher than his actual municipal salary. This financial tether ensured that every major city planning decision, from the expansion of the subway to the zoning of the industrial district, was vetted by corporate lawyers before it ever reached the city council. The mayor was a political host for the corporation, a man who traded the safety of his constituents for a life of luxury and a guaranteed seat in the post-evolution world order. His office was a front for Umbrella's municipal dominance. This corruption ensured that when the Arclay murders began, the mayor's office was the first to suppress the truth. Warren utilized his influence to paint the STARS team as alarmists, protecting the company's pharmaceutical myth until the very moment the infected were at his door. He was a man who understood the managed discarding of the city, believing that his loyalty would secure him an extraction that never came. The files show that Warren viewed Raccoon City as a disposable asset, a sentiment that mirrored the clinical detachment of Oswell Spencer. The mayor was the first domino to fall in the institutional denial, proving that the badge of office offered no protection against corporate greed. Secret 62. Hospital corruption. Raccoon General Hospital, the city's primary medical facility, was a temple of clinical treachery. The hospital utilized umbrella-funded security that was actually a specialized UBCS monitoring team in disguise. These operatives were not there to protect the patients. They were there to ensure that the biological data from the secret basement labs remained secure, and that any unplanned mutations among the general population were suppressed or retrieved for study. The hospital's board of directors was entirely composed of umbrella plants, turning the Hippocratic Oath into a corporate liability. The facility was a biological filter designed to harvest the citizens' health for the company's profit. The corruption extended to the very medicine being dispensed. The hospital's experimental treatments were often just field tests for early T virus variants, used on the poor and the uninsured who had nowhere else to turn. This medical atrocity was hidden behind layers of forged paperwork and non-disclosure agreements. By the time the outbreak reached a critical mass, the hospital was already a charnel house where the staff and patients were part of a managed slaughter. The corruption of Raccoon General ensured that the city's only hope for a medical cure was actually the primary source of its infection. The hospital was the ultimate umbrella of deception, a place where healing was a front for a massacre. Secret 63 RPD supply chains. A visceral secret hidden in the RPD precinct's inventory logs is the truth about the department's green herbs. These were not standard medical supplies. They were part of a localized umbrella experiment to see if medicinal plants could suppress or mask early T virus symptoms in a tactical environment. Jean Umbrella had been seeding the RPD's medical kits with these herbs for years, using the police force as unwitting test subjects for aromatic suppression. The corporation wanted to know if a soldier could be kept functional in a hot zone through botanical intervention. This turned the RPD's first aid into a secondary research objective, proving that the police were being infected and treated at the company's whim. The supply chain also explains why the RPD was so woefully under-equipped for the outbreak. While the department had an abundance of these experimental herbs, they were critically low on ammunition and tactical gear. This was a deliberate tactical sabotage by Chief Irons, who ensured that the department's budget was diverted to Umbrella's humanitarian grants and his own art collection. The police were effectively a disarmed force, kept in a state of medical dependency by the very company they were investigating. The green herbs in the station are monuments to this quiet influence, a reminder that even the act of healing was a data point in the combat data protocol. Secret 64, the subway line. The Kite Brewers Railway, Raccoon City's massive subway network, was not a project of municipal pride, but a logistics necessity for the Umbrella Corporation. The subway line was built using massive umbrella grants to ensure a direct, high-speed transport line between the city centre and the NET storage facility. This allowed the company to move biological assets and viral samples through the city's foundations without the risk of surface-level traffic or public observation. The commuters who used the subway every day were literally riding on top of a bioweapon highway. The subway line was a vertical umbilical cord connecting the city's heart to the corporation's dark research. This infrastructure was also designed to serve as a containment network during an outbreak. The subway tunnels were equipped with bulkhead systems and aerosol vents that could be used to seal off sections of the city or to deliver neutralizing agents or more virus to the subterranean population. The subway was a dual-use asset, serving as public transport by day and a death trap by night. For the citizens who gathered in the tunnels looking for an escape, the subway line was a surgical delivery system that led them directly into the jaws of the infection. The railway was the physical manifestation of Umbrella's deep state influence. a project that turned the city's mobility into its own cage. Secret 65. The press suppression. The Raccoon Press, the city's primary news outlet, was a corporate mouthpiece entirely owned and operated through umbrella shell companies. This is why investigative journalists like Alyssa Ashcroft had to go rogue to investigate the Arklay murders. Any story that mentioned biological anomalies or corporate negligence was spiked by editors who were on the umbrella payroll. The press suppression was a psychological shield that kept the citizens in a state of manufactured ignorance. It ensured that the pharmaceutical myth remained the dominant narrative, even as the mountains were filling with bodies. The media was the voice of the denial, a tool used to gaslight a dying city. This suppression created an information vacuum that was vital for the urban field test. By controlling the news, Umbrella could manage the population's fear threshold, ensuring that they did not panic and flee before the data could be collected. The press suppression was a clinical exercise in social engineering, proving that the corporation could control the truth just as easily as they could manipulate the genome. By the time the first zombies were appearing on television, the news was already an hour-by-hour lie, designed to lead the people to the extraction zones that were actually incineration sites. The Raccoon Press was the final umbrella of silence, a newspaper that recorded the city's end through a corporate lens. Secret 66. Sanitation. Lies. Raccoon City's water purification plant was the pride of the city's infrastructure, but the environmental storytelling reveals that it was actually a viral filtration site. Its true purpose was not to provide clean water to the citizens, but to separate and reclaim the T-virus from the city's industrial runoff before it could be detected by federal regulators. The sanitation lies of the plant were the foundation of the city's survival for decades. The plant was a corporate front that allowed Umbrella to operate its laboratories with total impunity, knowing that any leaks would be filtered and recycled by their own municipal equipment. When the plant finally failed in late September, the sanitation lies were exposed. The T-virus was no longer being filtered. It was being delivered directly into every home in the city. The purification plant became the epicenter of the waterborne infection, proving that the city's safe infrastructure was actually its greatest vulnerability. The sanitation lies were the ultimate success of the institutional denial that defined Raccoon City. The corporation had successfully convinced a population that their water was the cleanest in the country, while they were actually using it to brew a plague. The plant is a monument to the corporate mastery that led to the city's total destruction. Secret 67. Umbrella's youth program. A particularly predatory aspect of Umbrella's quiet influence was their sponsorship of high school science fairs and youth talent programs across Raccoon City. This was a genetic headhunting operation designed to identify students with high IQs and specific biological compatibility markers for future recruitment into their laboratories. The youth program was a way to ensure a steady supply of intellectual capital that was indoctrinated into the Umbrella way from an early age. These children were the Wesker children of the suburban world, groomed to believe that the corporation was their greatest benefactor, while their own genetic potential was being mapped and archived for military use. This program also allowed Umbrella to monitor the health and mutation rates of the next generation of citizens. By collecting science fair samples and medical records, they could gather data on the long-term effects of environmental exposure to the progenitor derivatives. The youth program was a social sieve, separating the assets from the discardable population. It highlights the total colonization of the future that Umbrella sought. They did not just want to own the city's present. They wanted to own its legacy. The students who won the Umbrella Scholarship were actually being sold into a life of scientific serfdom, proving that the corporation's hunger for biopower knew no age limit. Secret 68. The Raccoon Weekly. The Raccoon Weekly, a local lifestyle magazine found in the residential districts, provides a chilling look at the normalization of the brand. The magazine is filled with advertisements for Umbrella brand beauty products, health supplements, and household cleaners, showing that the corporation was in every aspect of a citizen's home. Umbrella had successfully integrated itself into the domestic rituals of the population, turning the act of cleaning a kitchen or applying a face cream into a contact point for their research. The Raccoon Weekly was a corporate catalogue of compliance, a reminder that in Raccoon City, you could not even wash your hands without touching the company's work. This domestic penetration ensured that the citizens viewed Umbrella as a comforting presence rather than a threatening entity. The beauty products were often low-level delivery systems for experimental skin conditioners that were actually derivatives of the T-virus research. The citizens were testing the product every time they got ready for work, providing the company with passive data on dermal absorption and cellular reaction. The Raccoon Weekly was a tool of biological normalization, a way to ensure that the corporation's logo was synonymous with quality of life. It proves that the Umbrella era was a world of branded existence, where the citizen was a consumer and the consumer was a test subject. Secret 69. Tax breaks. Raccoon City was officially a tax-free zone for the Umbrella Corporation, a municipal gift that made it the most profitable research site in the world. This financial arrangement ensured that the city's treasury was entirely dependent on Umbrella's humanitarian grants and infrastructure donations to function. The tax breaks were the financial chains that bound the city to the corporation's will. It created a corporate monarchy where the city's leadership could not afford to question the Arclay experiments, because doing so would mean the total economic collapse of the region. Raccoon City was a fiscal laboratory, a place where the value of life was calculated against the tax credit. This arrangement ensured that the city's public funds were actually corporate assets. Every RPD patrol car and every general hospital bed was purchased with the money Umbrella saved through its tax-free status. It turned the concept of public service into private contract. The tax breaks were the quiet influence that allowed the corporation to operate above the law, as they were the law's primary benefactor. It created a systemic dependency that ensured the city would defend its own executioner. In the complete timeline, the tax-free zone was the perfect financial crime, a way to turn an entire city into a corporate liability that was eventually liquidated for its biological data. Secret 70, Chief Irons' taxes. A visceral detail of the systemic rot is that Chief Brian Irons had not paid a single cent in personal taxes for over 5 years. Umbrella's legal team had made his financial problems disappear in exchange for his absolute loyalty. Irons was a financial slave to the corporation, a man whose tax evasion was the leverage Umbrella used to ensure he would sabotage the RPD's response to the outbreak. His personal debt was the corporate asset that allowed the corporation to control the city's police force. Irons was not just a corrupt cop. He was a managed liability, a man whose lust and greed were harnessed to protect the pharmaceutical myth. Irons' financial freedom came at the cost of the lives of his officers. He used the money he saved to fund his sadistic art collection and his private taxidermy hobby, turning the RPD precinct into a lodge of atrocity. The fact that his taxes were handled by a global pharmaceutical giant shows the microscopic control Umbrella held over the city's elite. They did not just buy the leadership, they managed their lives, ensuring that every secret and every sin was a tactical tool for the company. Irons was the enforcer of the denial, a man who knew that his own financial survival depended on the biological erasure of the city he was paid to protect. Secret 71, the pharmacy monopolies. In the commercial district of Raccoon City, you cannot find a single non-umbrella brand of medicine, from simple aspirin to specialized antibiotics. The corporation held a 100% pharmacy monopoly over the city's health, ensuring that every citizen was a captured consumer. This monopoly allowed Umbrella to monitor the health of the entire population through their prescription records and sales data. They knew who was sick, what they were taking, and how their bodies were responding to the environmental mutagens in the water supply. The pharmacy monopolies were the biological sensors that Umbrella used to map the city's infection potential. This control of the cure also meant that the corporation could manage the outbreak long before it became public. They could restrict the supply of antiviral agents or symptom suppressants to specific neighborhoods to see how the virus would spread without intervention. The pharmacies were field test nodes, where the product was the patient and the result was the data. The pharmacy monopolies proved that Umbrella viewed health as a controlled variable in their biological research. It was the ultimate quiet influence, a way to turn the act of buying medicine into an act of unintentional participation in a global war crime. Secret 72. The safe suburbs. The residential districts of Raccoon City were built as observation zones to see how the virus would spread in a suburban middle-class environment. The safe suburbs were a controlled environment where the houses were spaced specifically to test the range and speed of the T-virus's aerosol and fluid-borne transmission. The cul-de-sacs and the gated communities were actually containment blocks designed to trap the families inside their homes for easier study. The safe suburbs were the suburban laboratory of the Umbrella Corporation, a place where the family unit was the biological unit. The citizens in these districts believed they were living the American dream, unaware that their safe neighborhoods were actually field test sites. The suburban observation provided Umbrella with data on how a civilized population would react to a biological collapse. They monitored the breakdown of the neighborhood watch and the panic levels of the parents, using the suffering of the families as a metric for the virus's psychological impact. The safe suburbs were the gilded cages of the bioweapons era, proving that the corporation's quiet influence was most lethal in the places that looked the most peaceful. The suburbs were the silent graves of Raccoon City. Secret 73, police radio jamming. On the night of September 28th, as the city was being overrun, Umbrella activated a wide-spectrum jamming signal to prevent the RPD from calling for outside help or communicating with the National Guard. This was a tactical silence designed to ensure that the Raccoon City disaster remained a localized incident until the corporation could retrieve its assets and the government could execute the sterilization order. The police radio jamming was the digital seal that trapped the officers in a communication vacuum, forcing them to fight a blind war against an enemy they could not understand. The jamming was the quiet influence that turned the precinct into a tomb. This digital sabotage was coordinated between Umbrella's USS teams and the Connection's shell companies. They wanted to ensure that no live reports of the biological anomalies, like the lickers or the Tyrants, reached the international press. The radio jamming was a surgical strike on the city's information infrastructure, proving that the corporation was just as capable of electronic warfare as they were of biological warfare. For the officers on the street, the silence on the radio was the sound of their own abandonment. It was the institutional betrayal in its most clinical, high-tech form, a way to ensure that the city died in the dark, while the rest of the world watched a sanitized version of the news. Secret 74, the secret bioport. The Raccoon City underground was not just a series of sewers and subway tunnels. It was a massive logistics hub known as the secret bioport. This facility was used for shipping bioorganic weapons and viral samples between the American Midwest and Umbrella's headquarters in Europe. The bioport was the subterranean vein of the global bioweapons market, a place where the products were loaded and shipped under the very feet of the citizens. The bioport was the global connection that made Raccoon City the most important city in the Umbrella era. It was the industrial heart of the biological arms race. This facility ensured that the Arclay experiments were always connected to the global demand. The secret bioport was equipped with cryogenic storage and high-yield security, making it a mini-mansion beneath the commercial district. The bioport was the quiet influence that turned a Midwest town into a global port of call for the monsters. It proved that Umbrella's deep state influence was not just political, but infrastructure-based. The bioport was the final exit for the corporation's research, a place where the success of the Raccoon City disaster was exported to the rest of the world long before the city was sterilized. Secret 75, the last will of Lord Spencer. The final secret of Umbrella's quiet influence is that Oswell Spencer intended Raccoon City to be his funeral pyre. Leaked files found in the Caucasus facility suggest that Spencer viewed the city's destruction as a necessary sacrifice to prove his theory of global forced evolution. He believed that if he could not live forever as a god, he would ensure that no one else would live in a world that he did not control. The last will of Lord Spencer was the biological erasure of his own masterpiece. He turned his corporate colony into a sacrificial lamb, proving that his ambitious ego was more lethal than the T-virus itself. This final decree ensured that the sterilization order was not just a government decision, but a corporate requirement. Spencer wanted the city vaporized to hide the evidence of his own failure to achieve immortality. The last will was the quiet influence that turned a city of 100,000 people into a footnote in a madman's diary. It proves that the Umbrella era was never about health or science. It was about the absolute power of a single man. The funeral pyre of Raccoon City was the grand finale of the pharmaceutical myth, a way to ensure that the world of the dead was the only world Spencer would leave behind. Secret 76, brainstem targeting. The scientific lethality of the T-virus is rooted in its highly specific neural targeting system. Upon entering the host, the virus immediately begins a rapid colonization of the frontal lobe, which is the center for logic, reason, and higher executive function. This process effectively deletes the human personality, leaving behind a biological void. Simultaneously, the virus moves to the hypothalamus, the part of the brain responsible for primal instincts and hunger. The T-virus hyper-stimulates this region, creating a state of permanent metabolic emergency. The host is transformed into a feeding machine that is biologically incapable of feeling satiated, regardless of how much tissue it consumes. This is not a choice made by the monster. It is a neurological imperative hard-coded by the Umbrella researchers. The brain stem remains the most resilient part of the infected nervous system, which is why a zombie can continue to function even after suffering massive trauma to the rest of its body. The virus uses the brain stem to maintain basic motor control, ensuring that the host can still seek out fresh DNA to fuel its own cellular replication. This strategic neural decay was a key objective of the Arklay experiments. Umbrella wanted a weapon that would strip away the complexity of the human mind while retaining the lethality of the human predator. The result was a being that possessed all of the killing potential of a soldier, with none of the moral hesitation or psychological fatigue. The T-virus is essentially a neurological eraser, leaving only the hunger behind. Secret 77. Regeneration limits. A common misconception among the survivors of the Raccoon City collapse was that the zombies possess supernatural healing powers, but the biological reality is far more gruesome. Zombies cannot regenerate lost limbs or heal large wounds. Instead, they utilize a process of rapid, clotted cellular stasis. The T-virus causes the blood to thicken and clot almost instantly upon exposure to air, effectively plugging wounds and preventing the host from bleeding out. This allows a reanimated corpse to continue moving, even with a broken leg or a severed artery. They are not healing, they are simply being held together by a biological sludge that prevents the normal decay of the circulatory system. This clotted blood also acts as a synthetic lubricant for the joints, allowing the host to bypass rigor mortis. In a normal corpse, the muscles would lock up within 48 hours. But the T-virus secretes a mutagenic fluid that keeps the muscle fibers pliable and ready for locomotion. This means a zombie can walk on broken bones without feeling the agony that would paralyze a human. Their nerves are effectively dead, while their muscles are being overdriven by the viral infection. The regeneration limits of a zombie are governed by the availability of fresh protein. If the host does not feed, the body will eventually enter a state of mummification, though the virus will remain dormant within the cells for decades. Secret 78 mutation timers. One of the most terrifying discoveries made during the Arklay Mansion incident was the existence of the VAAT mutation, commonly known as the Crimson Head. This process is governed by a precise biological timer that activates approximately 2 hours after the host has been neutralized a second time. If the brain is not completely destroyed or the body cremated, the T-virus will re-energize the mitochondrial cells, forcing the host into a secondary, more aggressive state of reanimation. The skin turns a deep crimson as the blood vessels burst and the muscles grow at an accelerated rate. The mutation timer is a biological fail-safe designed to ensure that the weapon continues to evolve, even after it has been defeated. The Crimson Head represents the peak of the V-act process in a standard human host. The creature gains long, sharp claws and an increased heart rate, turning a shambling zombie into a sprinting predator. Umbrella's researchers recorded these mutation timers with clinical precision, noting that the transition requires a massive amount of metabolic energy. This is why the host becomes so much more aggressive. It is trying to compensate for the sudden loss of calories required to rewrite its own DNA in a matter of minutes. The timer is a reminder that in the world of the T-virus, death is not a destination, but a doorway to a more lethal form of existence. Secret 79. Liquor evolution. A liquor is not a separate species of bioweapon, but the result of a zombie consuming an extraordinary amount of fresh, high-quality DNA. When a standard host is flooded with new genetic material, it can trigger a violent second-stage VACT mutation that literally skins the host alive. The muscles expand so rapidly that the skin is shredded, and the brain grows until it is exposed through the top of the skull. the host's eyes are consumed by this neural growth, leading to the development of the creature's iconic heightened hearing. The liquor evolution is the biological proof that the T-virus is constantly seeking to improve itself through consumption. This evolution also leads to the development of the creature's elongated, muscular tongue and razor-sharp talons. The liquor is an apex urban predator, designed to hunt in the dark, vertical environments of a city's foundations. Umbrella's labs in the Raccoon City underground were specifically built to harvest these mutations for the global black market. They saw the liquor as a low-cost alternative to the Tyrant, a creature that could be mass-produced through the simple management of the urban food chain. Every liquor in the Raccoon City sewers was once a human being who fed long enough and successfully enough to become a master of the hunt. Secret 80, the G in G virus. The G in the G virus stands for Golgotha, a reference to the biblical site of suffering and crucifixion. This name was chosen by William Birkin to represent the endless, agonizing cycle of mutation that the host must endure. Unlike the T virus, which seeks a stable, reanimated state, the G virus is a pathogen of perpetual change. It creates a host that is in a constant state of biological panic, growing new limbs, eyes, and organs in a desperate attempt to reach a state of genetic perfection that does not exist. The Golgotha logic is one of total biological instability, where the host is literally consumed by its own growth. This perpetual mutation makes the G host nearly impossible to kill through conventional means. Every time the host is damaged, the G cells respond by creating a new, more resilient form. This is the ultimate expression of Birkin's ego, a virus that refuses to die and refuses to stop evolving. The G virus is a biological realization of the concept of eternal suffering, as the host's original human identity is trapped within a mass of pulsating, ever-changing flesh. The name Golgotha is a reminder that the G virus was not intended to be a weapon of war, but a weapon of godhood, a way to conquer the limits of the human form through a legacy of pain. Secret 81. Eye growth logic. The presence of massive, unblinking eyes on the shoulders and backs of G virus hosts is a visceral example of the virus's sensory logic. As the host's original human brain begins to fail, and the eyes go blind from the pressure of the mutation, the G cells grow new masses of optic nerves to find light. These eyes are not just for sight. They are sensory clusters that can detect heat, movement, and changes in air pressure. This creates a predator with a 360-degree field of tactical awareness, making it nearly impossible to ambush. The eye growth is a biological emergency response, a way for the virus to ensure that the host remains the apex predator in any environment. These eyes also act as biological weak points, as they are the most densely packed areas of the host's new nervous system. However, the virus protects these nodes with thickened muscle and bone, showing a level of tactical engineering that exceeds the T virus. The eye growth logic proves that the G virus possesses a form of cellular intelligence that can prioritize sensory survival over traditional human anatomy. Every new eye that opens on a G host is a node in a biological hive mind that is constantly scanning for the next threat. It is a being that has been redesigned to see everything, ensuring that its evolution is never interrupted by the interference of a human hunter. Secret 82. T-Veronica's cold logic. The T-Veronica strain, developed by Alexia Ashford, represents a departure from the chaotic mutations of the Birkin era. It utilizes a cold logic that requires the host to be placed in cryogenic sleep for exactly 15 years. This period of extreme cold allows the human mind and the virus to bond slowly, preventing the violent, brain-destroying mutations seen in other strains. This was Alexia's way of maintaining her human consciousness and her superior intellect while gaining the powers of a god. The T-Veronica strain is the ultimate expression of the Ashford family's obsession with legacy and aristocratic control. This 15-year timer is a biological necessity because of the virus's highly aggressive mutagenic properties. If the host were to remain at room temperature, the T-Veronica strain would consume them in seconds, turning them into a mindless, insectoid monster. The cold logic of the virus allows for a perfect synchronization between the host and the pathogen, creating a being that can control the mold and fire at will. Alexia Ashford became the queen of a biological hive, proving that the T-virus could be tamed through the use of time and temperature. The T-Veronica strain is a reminder that in the world of Umbrella, the most dangerous weapons are the ones that are incubated in the dark for decades. Secret 83. Mold memory. The mold found in the Louisiana bayou and the Eastern European village is a biological superorganism that functions as a memory mutagen. Every person who is infected by the mold has their DNA and their consciousness archived within the fungal network. This means that even after the body dies, the ghost of the individual remains active within the hive mind of the megamycete. The mold memory is a library of human suffering, a mass of data that can be accessed and manipulated by the central host. This is the secret to the Baker family's immortality. They were not just people. They were mold constructs based on their own archived memories. This ability to store consciousness makes the mold the most valuable biological asset in the complete timeline. It offers a way to achieve a form of eternal life, though it is a life devoid of individual autonomy. The mold memory ensures that every secret and every tactical skill of a victim is preserved for the use of the syndicate. This is the ultimate goal of the connections, a world where information can be harvested directly from the cells of the dead. The mold proves that the next generation of bioweapons is not about killing the enemy, but about owning their very identity. The ghost in the machine is now a ghost in the fungus. Secret 84. Las Plagas versus virus. A fundamental scientific difference exists between the Las Plagas parasite and the various viruses of the Umbrella era. Viruses, like the T-virus, rewrite the host's DNA at a cellular level, leading to the total destruction of the human mind and the reanimation of the body. In contrast, the Plagas parasite controls the host's central nervous system, acting as a biological driver for a living human being. This is why Plagas hosts, such as the Ganados and the Magini, can still talk, use tools, and follow complex tactical commands. They are not dead. They are simply enslaved by a parasite that has integrated itself into their spinal cord. This parasitic control allows for a level of social coordination that is impossible for a viral horde. The Plagas can be commanded by a master host using high-frequency sound waves, creating a disciplined, religious military force. While a virus creates a chaotic outbreak, the parasite creates a biological army. Shin Umbrella and its successors recognize the value of this control, leading to the development of the Type 2 and Type 3 Plagas used in the Africa and Eastern Europe incidents. The parasite is the holy grail of bio-tactical control, a weapon that can turn a peaceful population into an obedient, lethal workforce in a matter of hours. Secret 85. The Tyrant's Coat. The iconic trench coat worn by the Tyrant model T003 is not a piece of clothing, but a high-tech power limiter, made of a bulletproof synthetic leather. Its primary purpose is to prevent the Tyrant from suffering an uncontrolled mutation into a super Tyrant too early in the mission. The coat compresses the Tyrant's massive muscle mass and regulates its internal temperature, ensuring that the creature remains in its bipedal, manageable form. If the coat is destroyed, the Tyrant's heart rate spikes and the VACT process is triggered, turning the industrial soldier into a towering mass of claws and rage. This limiter is a testament to Umbrella's obsession with control. They didn't just want a monster. They wanted a monster they could ship in a crate and deploy in a city without it turning on its handlers. The coat is the physical manifestation of the combat data protocol, a way to manage the performance of the bioweapon in the field. To the survivors, the coat is a symbol of the Tyrant's invulnerability, as it can deflect small arms fire and even withstand minor explosions. But to the scientists at Umbrella, the coat was just a piece of safety equipment, a way to ensure that their investment survived long enough to provide the data they needed. Secret 86, Zombie Rigor Mortis. Standard biological science states that a corpse should enter rigor mortis within a few hours of death, but the T-virus has engineered a way to bypass this limitation. The virus secretes a synthetic lubricant into the host's joints and muscle fibers, preventing the calcium buildup that causes the body to lock up. This allows the zombie to remain mobile for as long as the virus has energy to fuel the cells. The T-virus effectively turns the body into a low-friction machine, ensuring that the host can seek out fresh prey without being hindered by its own decay. This is why zombies are fresh for 48 hours, but remain dangerous for weeks. This lubricant also prevents the total mummification of the tissue, keeping the muscles pliable even after the skin has begun to rot away. Umbrella documented this process as a successful override of the natural laws of decomposition. They wanted a weapon that would remain an active threat in a variety of climates and environments. The rigor mortis bypass is the secret to the T-virus's longevity as a tactical hazard. Even in the cold of a mountain winter or the damp of a city sewer, the host remains ready to lunge. It is a biological engine that has been optimized for the hunt, refusing to stop even after the heart has long since finished beating. Secret 87. The Red Herb Mystery. For decades, survivors have utilized the red herb to enhance the effectiveness of the green herb. But the scientific secret is that the red herb has no healing power on its own. It acts as a biological catalyst that triples the potency of the green herb's medicinal properties. The red herb contains a high concentration of an enzyme that triggers a rapid cellular absorption of the green herb's healing agents. When mixed together, the resulting compound can close wounds and neutralize minor toxins in seconds. This was a botanical discovery made by the early researchers at the Arklay lab, who realized the local flora possessed unique mutagenic properties that could be used to stabilize the human immune system. Umbrella's interest in these herbs was not humanitarian. They wanted to understand how the plants could survive in an environment that was being constantly exposed to progenitor runoff. The herbs were essentially natural mutants, and their healing power was a side effect of their own highly efficient cellular repair systems. By utilizing these herbs, the STARS members were unwittingly using Umbrella's own botanical research to survive the night. The red herb is a reminder that even the tools of survival in the series were part of the corporation's environmental legacy. It is a catalyst for life in a world that Umbrella had designed for death. Secret 88. The VACT process. The VACT process is the foundational biological fail-safe of the T virus. It is a mutagenic trigger that activates when the host has been killed a second time, or when the host's body has suffered extreme trauma. The virus recognizes that the current form is no longer viable and initiates a rapid, violent reanimation. This involves a massive surge of metabolic energy that rewrites the host's DNA in minutes, leading to the creation of the crimson head or the liquor. The VACT process is the T virus's way of ensuring that its investment is never truly lost. It is a biological defense mechanism that turns a defeat into a more lethal evolution. This process was one of the most successful milestones in Umbrella's research history. They saw the VACT as a way to create a self-improving bioweapon that would only get more dangerous the longer a battle lasted. It meant that every soldier killed by a survivor was just a temporary setback before the monster returned in a superior form. The VACT is the ultimate realization of the forced evolution ideology, a way to ensure that the virus always has the last word. For a survivor, the VACT is a reason to never stop running, as the body behind them is already busy becoming the predator of their nightmares. Secret 89. Ouroboros rejection. The Ouroboros virus, developed by Albert Wesker and Tricell, is the most selective mutagen in the complete timeline. If a person's DNA is not deemed worthy by the virus's complex genetic checks, the Ouroboros will literally consume the host in seconds, turning their body into a pile of writhing black leeches. This is known as Ouroboros rejection, a violent and absolute failure of compatibility. The virus acts as a genetic sieve, erasing anyone who does not possess the specific markers required for Wesker's vision of a new world order. The rejection is not just a death, it is a total biological liquidation. This rejection process ensures that only the elite would survive Wesker's planned global sterilization. It was a weapon of pure eugenics, designed to separate the human race into the gods and the ash. The black leeches are actually a mass of out-of-control viral material that seeks to consume everything in its path to find a more compatible host. The Ouroboros rejection is the final, most clinical expression of the Spencerian ideology. It is a virus that doesn't just kill the weak, it deletes them from the history of the Earth. In the Africa incident, thousands of people were liquefied by this process, proving that Wesker's vision was as genocidal as it was biological. Secret 90, the Megamycete's age. Carbon dating and archaeological research conducted in the village reveal that the Megamycete fungal root has been under the mountains for over 1,000 years. This means the mold is an ancient, natural mutagen that predates all modern science. It has been archiving the lives and deaths of the local population for centuries, creating a vertical record of a civilization that never knew it was being watched by a fungus. The Megamycete is a biological relic of a pre-umbrella world, a natural archive that proves the origins of the nightmare are older than any corporation. It is the foundational fungi that influenced the very birth of the bioweapons industry. The age of the Megamycete suggests that the history of human evolution has always been influenced by these deep, subterranean mutagens. The village was built on a foundation of memory, and Mother Miranda was merely the first person to learn how to plug into that archive. The fact that the fungus is over 1,000 years old proves that it is a highly stable and successful organism that has outlasted every human empire. Umbrella was just the latest group to try and bottle its power. The Megamycete's age is a chilling reminder that while corporations may fall, the biology of the nightmare is a permanent part of the Earth's crust. It is an ancient god waiting for the next generation of researchers to wake it up. Secret 91, BSAA, Parallels. By the year 2026, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance has undergone a transformation that makes them indistinguishable from the original Umbrella Corporation. The secret files discovered by Chris Redfield reveal that the agency is now actively deploying its own bioorganic weapons to maintain global order. They have moved from a peacekeeping force to a militarized biopower that views the virus as a standard tactical tool. The BSAA has successfully integrated the research of the fallen corporations into its own military infrastructure, proving that the heroes of the Raccoon City era have become the administrators of a new, high-tech biological empire. The agency is now the very thing it was created to destroy. This parallel is the ultimate failure of the anti-bioterrorism movement. By fighting a global war against the T-virus, the BSAA realized that the only way to win was to become a monster themselves. They have adopted the same combat data protocols and the same institutional denial that defined Umbrella in the 1990s. The BSAA bioweapons are the standard for modern warfare, and the agency's moral authority has been completely vaporized by its own pragmatism. For Chris Redfield, this is the final betrayal. He has spent 30 years hunting Umbrella, and only to find that the organization he helped build is now carrying out the same experiments in the name of security. Secret 92, Normalization. In the world of Resident Evil 9, bioterrorism has become a normalized and managed part of daily life. The complete timeline shows that the era of the secret outbreak is over. Now, schools conduct bioterrorism drills as regularly as they once conducted fire drills. The public has been conditioned to accept the sight of gas masks and hazmat teams as a standard feature of their urban environment. The fear of the virus has been weaponized by governments to maintain a state of permanent emergency, allowing for a level of social control that would have been impossible before the Raccoon City disaster. The abnormal has become the foundation of the New World Order. This normalization is the ultimate victory for the pharmaceutical giants. They have successfully convinced the world that biological threats are a permanent part of the human condition, making their vaccines and defensive technologies a mandatory part of citizenship. The public is no longer resistant to the idea of genetic screening or biological surveillance. They see it as a necessary price for survival. The normalization of bioterrorism has erased the concept of a biological free zone, turning the entire planet into a managed laboratory where the citizens are the primary test subjects. The nightmare is no longer a localized incident. It is a global lifestyle. Secret 93, Blue Umbrella's Lie. The organization known as Blue Umbrella claims to be a repentant group of former employees seeking to atone for the company's past crimes. But the secret files reveal they are actually a front for the DSO and the United States government. They were formed to ensure that the most dangerous viral samples and research data stayed within the control of the American military. Blue Umbrella is a tactical shield that allows the government to continue Umbrella's work under the guise of ethical research and disaster cleanup. They are the janitors of the bioweapons industry, ensuring that no independent investigation ever reaches the heart of the federal biological program. This lie has allowed the government to build a monopoly on the most lethal pathogens in history. Blue Umbrella provides the technical expertise and the deniability required for the state to operate its own black sites and laboratories. They are the architects of a new kind of institutional denial, where the corporation is dead, but its spirit lives on in the national security apparatus. For survivors like Leon Kennedy, working with Blue Umbrella is a constant reminder of the compromise they had to make to stay alive. The company's blue logo is a symbol of the sanitized war crimes of the present day, a reminder that the fire in Raccoon City didn't kill the virus, it just gave it a new employer. Secret 94. The Connections. The syndicate known as the Connections is not a new player in the bioweapons market, but a group composed of former Umbrella executives who escaped the 2003 trials. They utilized their remaining assets and stolen research to create a decentralized network of laboratories and smuggling routes. The Connections specialize in psychological bioweapons, like the E-series mold, seeking to achieve the total control of the human mind that Oswell Spencer always dreamed of. They are the shadows of the old world, a group that has moved from corporate dominance to organized crime to protect their research from international law. This syndicate represents the privatization of the biological nightmare. They operate in the darkest corners of the earth, utilizing the power vacuum left by the fall of Umbrella and Tricell to expand their influence. The Connections are the link between the ancient research in Eastern Europe and the modern high-tech laboratories of the West. They are a ghost organization that has no headquarters to destroy and no board of directors to arrest. They have successfully turned the bioweapons market into a global, underground economy where the currency is human DNA. The Connections are the proof that the Umbrella era never truly ended. It just went into the shadows to wait for its next opportunity to bloom. Secret 95. The Global Sterilization Plan. Leaked files within the DSO archives, known as the Requiem Protocol, suggest that the United States government has a contingency plan for global sterilization. If a level 5 biological outbreak occurs that cannot be contained by traditional military force, the plan calls for the sanitization of entire continents through high-yield thermal and chemical strikes. This is the Raccoon City sterilization order on a global scale. The government has decided that if they cannot control the virus, they will ensure that nothing survives to witness their failure. The Requiem Protocol is the ultimate expression of the containment nihilism that defines the modern era. This plan highlights the absolute lack of value placed on human life by the people in power. They view the population as a series of biological units that can be liquidated to protect the integrity of the state. The global sterilization plan is the final insurance policy of the bioweapons industry, a way to ensure that the biological arms race never results in a loss of political control. For the heroes who have spent their lives trying to save individuals, the discovery of this plan is the ultimate betrayal. It proves that the state is prepared to commit a crime against humanity that makes Umbrella look like a minor offender. The world is living under a shadow of a fire that can be triggered by a single vial. Secret 96. The Winter's Legacy. Rosemary Winters has become the most powerful biological weapon on Earth, and the secret files show that the BSAA is raising her specifically to be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Because she possesses a perfect, conscious control over the mold and the megamycete, Rose is the first being who can act as a localized hive mind for the state. She represents the total integration of the human spirit and the fungal superorganism. The BSAA has placed her in a gilded cage of surveillance and tactical training, using her father's sacrifice to manipulate her into becoming the ultimate guardian of their biological empire. The legacy of the Winters family is one of total biological exploitation. Ethan was the test subject, and Rose is the final product. She possesses the power to rewrite the memories and the biology of anyone she touches, making her the holy grail of bio-tactical control. The BSAA intends to use her to sanitize the world's conflict zones, turning a single girl into a global enforcer. Rose is a symbol of the post-human future, a being who is a hero to the public, but a tactical asset to the people who own her. Her legacy is the proof that the Umbrella Way has successfully conquered the concept of the family, turning a father's love into a state secret. Secret 97. The Merchant's Network. The mysterious figures, known as the Duke and the Merchant, are revealed to be part of a global black market network that has existed since before the Arklay murders. This network is the invisible economy of the bioweapons era, providing supplies, information, and high-tech weaponry to both the heroes and the monsters. They are the brokers of the apocalypse, people who view the biological collapse of civilization as a lucrative business opportunity. The Merchant's Network is proof that there is a third power in the complete timeline, the people who profit from the war between the scientists and the survivors. This network operates in the grey areas where the state and the corporations cannot reach. They have access to the most secret research sites and the most isolated outposts, acting as a vital supply chain for anyone with enough coin to pay their price. The Duke's knowledge of the Megamice seat and the mold suggests that this network has been studying the ancient mutagens for centuries. They are the archivists of the black market, the people who know where every vial is buried and every monster is hidden. The Merchant's Network is a reminder that the nightmare is a self-sustaining ecosystem, and as long as there is profit to be made from the virus will never truly be eradicated. Secret 98. Raccoon City Survivors. Statistical analysis conducted by the DSO reveals a terrifying truth about the Raccoon City disaster. Less than 1% of the city's population escaped the blast zone on October 1st. Almost every survivor the player encounters, Leon, Claire, Jill, and Carlos, is a statistical miracle. The city was a charnel house where the odds of survival were virtually zero for the average citizen. This highlights the absolute lethality of the urban field test that Umbrella conducted. The survivors are not just heroes. They are the anomalies that the corporation and the government failed to liquidate. They are the managed errors of the complete timeline. The survivors carry a burden of survivors' guilt that is systematically utilized by the state to keep them in service. The government knows that people like Leon Kennedy will never stop fighting because they are haunted by the 99% who didn't make it out. This psychological trauma is a tactical asset for the DSO. It ensures that the survivors are the most dedicated and the most expendable operatives in the global war on terror. The survivors are the ghosts of a dead city, people who have been allowed to live only because their trauma makes them the perfect weapons. They are the living monuments to a massacre that the world has already chosen to forget. Secret 99, Resident Evil 9. Implication. The secret files and the trajectory of the complete timeline suggest that Resident Evil 9 will focus on the final collapse of the old guard. The era of Leon, Jill, and Chris is coming to a violent, definitive end. They have become the relics of a world that no longer exists, and the BSAA views them as liabilities that must be neutralized to make way for the new order, represented by Rose Winters. The implication is that the next chapter will be a civil war within the bioweapons complex, a final struggle between the survivors of Raccoon City and the global military infrastructure they helped build. The heroes may finally meet a permanent end at the hands of their own organization. This shift represents the final transition from survival horror to biological realism. The heroes are no longer enough to stop a world that has fully embraced the monster. The next game will likely force the player to confront the reality that the rescuers are the villains. The end of the old guard is a tactical necessity for the BSAA, as it removes the last witnesses to the agency's original mission. The world leading into Resident Evil 9 is a world that has outgrown its heroes, leaving them to fight a final, hopeless war against a global hive mind that already has their DNA on file. The stage is set for a final, visceral reckoning with the legacy of the Umbrella Corporation. Secret 100. The final truth. The final and most devastating truth of the entire series is that the Umbrella Corporation did not fail. They succeeded. Their original goal, set by Oswald Spencer in 1966, was to change the world forever through the use of the progenitor virus. In the year 2026, that vision has been realized. The world is now a permanent biological war zone where the virus is the foundation of global power, state security, and corporate profit. Umbrella didn't just lose control of their research. They successfully integrated it into the very fabric of human civilization. The pharmaceutical myth is gone, and the biological reality is all that remains. Umbrella's success is the ultimate tragedy of the complete timeline. Every outbreak and every death served as a data point that helped refine the global bioweapons market. The corporation may be dead, but its ideology of forced evolution is the dominant religion of the modern age. We are living in a world that Umbrella designed, a place where the concept of humanity has been permanently rewritten by the laboratory. The final truth is that the nightmare is not coming to an end. It has already won. The world is a managed charnel house, and we are all just assets waiting to be liquidated by the next generation of the virus.